Welcome to OK Let's Talk. I'm your host, Rob, and today we're diving into the latest global reports from all around the world. And we aren't just watching the news, we're breaking down the history and the why behind the headlines to give you a deeper educational perspective. With that said, let's get to the analysis, and the educational commentary and analysis that you hear falls under Fair Use, Section 107. Enjoy the stream.
Push up farming and food prices. Could this conflict trigger the next global food shock? First came the energy shock. Now the Iran war is hitting something even more basic: the food on your plate. With the Strait of Hormuz effectively blocked, shipping lines are suspending bookings, vessels are being rerouted, and supply chains are under strain. The disruption is pushing up the costs of almost everything from factories to supermarket shelves thousands of miles away. The longer the Iran conflict continues,
we're definitely feeling it here in the U.S. already. That's for sure.
Worldwide.
Food is going up,
rising food, oil,
and it was already up.
Push an additional 45 million people into acute hunger, taking the global total above its record of 319 million. Could the Middle East conflict trigger the next global food shock, and who ultimately pays the price? Fintan Monahan reports.
Iran has been threatening shipping through the Strait of Hormuz.
We pay the price. That's who pays it.
And
the average person.
Global supply chains is being felt around the world.
Corporations just pass the cost on to us.
Hundreds of trucks have been backed up at many Middle East border crossings. But redrawing trade routes will cost time and money, and that expense will be passed on to the global economy and ultimately the consumer. Many sectors will face disruptions, but everywhere won't be affected equally.
The spike in global food and fuel costs could leave millions of families priced out of stable foods, particularly in import-dependent countries like sub-Saharan Africa and Asia.
One of the biggest impacts may be on global food production. 1/3 of the seaborne fertilizer trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Gulf nations make several vital ingredients. The cost of two key inputs, urea and sulfur, are up more than 35% since the war began. Even the US, which is largely insulated from many of the trade disruptions, is preparing to subsidize its agricultural sector.
I have been in conversation with the Hill on that as they're looking at additional funds.
What's with all the
for
cowboy
farmers.
hats?
So at this point,
Are you stupid?
everything is on the table. This president is convicted. He is resolute.
So we have to bail out farmers?
He will stand with our farmers. He knows
should
that
be
it's a national
convicted.
security issue, and we're on it.
Right now, farmers are making long-term decisions on what to grow, based on the cost and availability of fertilizer. So even if the crisis ends soon, the impact on food supplies will last much longer. African countries are among the most reliant on fertilizer imports by sea, and will likely be hit the hardest. Kenya, Somalia, and Tanzania all get more than a quarter of their supply from the Gulf. Sudan gets half. And in places like Gaza, where humanitarian emergencies have already pushed the population to its limits, disruptions to vital supplies of food and medicine could mean the difference between life and death.
On the Straits of Hormuz, I'm really worried about food costs, energy costs, as you say, fertilizer costs. I'm worried that actually further escalation will damage other supply routes. All of this has a direct impact on our humanitarian supplies.
Fertilizer, helium now.
Areas of key need in sub-Saharan
key for
Africa.
chips,
But more
microchips.
broadly, it drives up the prices, and so drives more people into greater need.
Transport is also going to be hit in regions reliant on Gulf crude oil. Europe, Africa, and Oceania may run short on jet fuel as reserves run dry. Some Southeast Asian nations could run critically short of petrol in less than 2 weeks. Manufacturing is also in jeopardy. Smelters in the Gulf produce millions of tons of aluminium each year, and helium is vital to the production of semiconductors. Gulf petrochemicals are also a key input for pharmaceutical factories in India and China. No one knows how long the Strait of Hormuz will be closed, or when trade flows will return to normal. But the economic consequences will be felt far beyond the Gulf region.
It's going to be months to years before everything's back to normal.
The crisis in the Gulf has revealed how vulnerable global supply chains really are. 80% of goods traded worldwide are transported by sea. Cargo ships need to pass through a number of narrow choke points. Major ones include the Malacca Strait, the Panama Canal, Bab el-Mandeb, and the Strait of Hormuz. A blockage at any one of these places has massive consequences for global trade. In 2024, attacks by Yemen's Houthi armed groups blocked ships from passing through Bab al-Mandeb. During times like these, shipping companies have to spend time and money diverting cargo, in this case, around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. This disruption and another at the Panama Canal that same year resulted in an extra 0.6 percentage points of global inflation that year. Right now, the war in Iran is affecting both the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb. Major insurance companies won't cover ships that risk those routes, which effectively means they are closed. Now, around 3,200 vessels are stuck in the Gulf as a result of Iran's strikes. Meanwhile,
Over
charges for shipping
1,000
containers
vessels?
have risen up to 4 times
Amazing.
higher on certain routes because of war risk insurance costs, as well as fuel surcharges. Freight rates between Shanghai and Northern Europe, for example, rose 11% to more than $1,600 per container last week. But it's routes into the Gulf that are seeing the sharpest increases. A container from the UK to Jebel Ali in Dubai that once cost $1,500 is now close to $6,000. Much of that cost is passed on to consumers, from everyday goods to food. Now, Stavros Karamperidis is an associate professor
Trump really
in maritime
shit the bed with
economics
this
and
one.
also is the head of the Maritime Transport
He's in
Research
way
Group
over
at
his
the
head
University
again.
of Plymouth, where he joins us from. From Washington, D.C., we're joined by Joseph Glauber. He's a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. And in Nairobi, we're joined by David Owiro. He's an international development and trade analyst and a principal consultant at the Africa Development think tank. Stavros, let's start off with you. How significant is the disruption that we are seeing on these global shipping routes right now? I mean, of course, a lot of this will depend on how long this conflict goes on for, but right now, what is actually the effect?
Thank you very much, Rhys, for having me in the show. And to be frank, it's kind of difficult to say what exactly the impact is going to be. But as you nicely summarized in your introduction, we've seen that, for example, the cost of bunkers, which is the actual fuel for moving those vessels, has doubled up since the war has begun, from nearly 450 US dollars per ton to nearly 900. Insurance costs, as you said, they skyrocketed. So we can see that long term, for vessels that are trading in the region, but also globally, they're going to have a huge impact in terms of the overall operational cost. And that, of course, is going to be moved to the final consumers, because we have to consider that when we pay for the transportation of the goods, that kind of money will end up to the final customer.
Joseph, are we at risk of food shortages anytime soon? And if so, which are the parts of the world which are likely to be the most vulnerable?
Yeah, no, I think obviously the most vulnerable is within the Gulf itself. They import a lot of food, a lot of grains, oil seeds, vegetable oil, sugar, all sorts of products come through the Strait of Hormuz. And so for a lot of those countries, they are already dealing with shortages, particularly a country like Iran, which was already facing very, very high food inflation. I think the longer term concerns obviously are on the fertilizer side, because it is, as was pointed out in the introduction, such an important exporting region for particularly nitrogen-based fertilizers, but also phosphate and sulfur as well, which is an important ingredient in phosphate production. But those impacts, I think, are much harder to kind of anticipate or estimate what those impacts will be. Fertilizer prices hit record levels in 2022, for example, much higher than the levels we currently see, and yet there weren't very big impacts on productivity gains that year. We had good yields. But the question is, back in 2022, grains prices were really high as well, and now they're really low, and so the profitability margins are much less for farmers. So will they make choices to grow less intensive crops like soybeans? Will they utilize less
Tell them to who?
fertilizer? All those are big questions which we don't have good answers to.
Trump's
I
just
think
going to
the
bail out
immediate
the
impact
farmers.
or the more pressing impact on inflation, however, would probably be through the energy sector, just in the sense of, as was just mentioned, that freight rates are up, or shipping rates are up. Also, transportation rates within countries, getting that food from the farm to the retail shelf there's a lot of energy embodied in that. And those sorts of costs will, I think, have impacts on the overall macro economy, but food prices as well.
When you look at all this, and David, I mean, Africa's, of course, incredibly vulnerable here. I mean, countries which are hugely debt-laden, perhaps sclerotic in terms of underfunding with their infrastructure, and also largely a lot of the people who are, let's say, got variable wages, and they quite often have a huge marginal propensity to spend on food.
Yeah, you're right. Africa is particularly vulnerable, given that this presents a compound crisis. Not only is it an energy and food crisis, but also it's finding Africa within a contextual framework where the aid architecture is weaker. There's zero fiscal buffer in terms of social safety nets and government response, and so much of the effects, the macroeconomic effects, are likely to have a much greater impact. When it comes to food, for instance, we've already talked about the high or the rise in fertilizer costs, or even the availability of fertilizer. This is likely to, lead to, present decisions that are being made right now as regards the planting season in East Africa, for instance. So down the line, 3-4 months, when the harvest is coming, it's likely to be a more depressed harvest, likely because of, inadequate fertilizer input, as an example.
Yeah, Joseph, I just want
It's
to get
amazing how much this little piece of land, this little strip of water,
what actually, it's not
has
just fertilizer.
affected
We've got urea,
everything
which is used in
worldwide.
fertilizer. 33% of global shipments go through the Straits of Hormuz. Methanol, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran produce about, 22% of global supply. We've got phosphate fertilizers, ammonia, sulfur, polymers, and interesting enough, also helium, with which of course used in magnetic resonating systems and semiconductors. And Qatar provides 30% of the global supply here. So it is actually much bigger in scale.
South Korea's in a lot of trouble because of the helium. That's for sure.
Joseph.
Yeah, I know it's interesting to me. I track these sorts of things as part of my job, and it was interesting. The first few days or so, most of the focus was on oil, and rightly so. It's a major oil exporting region, but over time, I think the rest of the world has begun to realize just how much fertilizer in particular comes out of that region. The other thing is liquid natural or liquefied natural gas, which is a big feedstock for nitrogen fertilizers. That also comes out of the Gulf. So if you look at a country like India, which is a fairly major importer of nitrogen fertilizers, a major importer from the Gulf, they are scrambling now to find supplies elsewhere.
Stavros, how does this work when it comes to supply chains themselves? I mean, we saw them being rerouted anyway at the start of Donald Trump's first administration with the threat of tariffs. There was a lot of rejigging going on at that point. What about now? And COVID, of course, big part of it. 2022 Ukraine invasion also made a big difference. How does this change the whole dynamic?
As you rightly mentioned, all the crises we've recently faced, supply chains are very sensitive to that kind of changes. So as you may remember well, when COVID hit us, we had to reroute a lot of cargo, and of course all that had a cost. What we see this time that's kind of different from the previous crisis is that the sharpness, how quickly things are evolving, and how with the big impact they're having to the overall supply chain. I'm hoping that we're not going to have any further escalation of the overall situation in the supply chains, and hopefully things will balance a bit, because usually, and as we discussed also in previous crises, you have the first shock, you have the first reaction of the market, and then things are going down. Prime example for is what we experienced today. When we had, for example, during the night, the hit of the main critical infrastructure in Qatar, and of course the oil price and the LNG price has risen by 20-30% at the beginning of the stock exchange, but after that has dropped down because they realized that it's like, okay, there is a big hit, but we can adjust, we can find alternatives. And I think long term we could find some alternatives. The key question is, what are we going to do now? Because as you mentioned, massive amount of not only oil, which is nearly 1/5 of the global oil and energy that's passing through the region, but also other commodities which are critical for our daily operations are passing through the Strait of Hormuz.
David, which countries or economies in Africa do you think are likely to really feel the crunch here from not just the food, but the energy shock which will emanate?
Yeah, there are a number of countries here. So the tier of impact, I'd say around three. The first one is, of course, those that are critically affected. These are countries that not only have a net food or net energy importers, but also are under an IMF program and have high debt to GDP ratio. That, together with countries that have large urban areas and large urban populations. So those ones that face these are practically Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and those within the Sahel corridor. They're facing all four vulnerability factors simultaneously. Second tier is the ones that are high risk. You can imagine these are the ones that have a large population facing crisis of hunger. And these mostly are within the West African belt. So Nigeria comes to mind, Chad, Cameroon, and Niger. The third tier of impact is the countries that are structurally fragile. So these are the ones that do not have perhaps a mode or architecture to deploy a social safety net, or even social safety nets do not exist within those countries. So if you look at Africa, we're talking of countries such as Zimbabwe, Zambia, Sudan, Somalia, and the like. And these are countries that face drought, food, or economic difficulties that compound this crisis much further.
Joseph, have you made any calculations? I know it's a work in progress given the length of time this conflict goes on for, but have you made any calculations on the impact on consumer prices, CPI?
This conflict's going to be going on for quite a while.
That's a great question. I think it's difficult just because we don't know how long this will persist, and if this is resolved relatively quickly, then I think the impacts would be modest. But the longer this is prolonged, and the more length of time that energy prices remain above $100, oil prices remain above $100 a barrel, and I think that there we will begin to see some inflation threat. How much of it really ends up in food inflation? Again, the commodity side of it, you realize that particularly in developed countries, the farm value of food, the retail food, is fairly small. I mean, really less than 15%. So most of that processing, most of the cost of the retail food really occurs after the farm. So that's where energy can play a potential role here.
Well, with everything in mind, Stavros, I mean, if they closed the other choking point, if the Yemeni Houthis got involved, the Bab al-Mandeb, ironically called the Gate of Tears in Arabic, if they cut that off, that would really add this extra choke point. And the thing is, the area
is there a viable threat that they can cut that off?
East Asia, given they actually import about
Let me know in the
80%
chat.
of the global energy, well, their energy needs. From the Middle East. But on top of that, they import a lot in terms of what we're talking about, these other elements such as fertilizers, urea, sulfur, hydrogen, helium as well.
No, that's absolutely correct. And, it's a very thin balance act that is happening in the region, both in the Red Sea or in the, as you said, in the Straits over there, or in the Strait of Hormuz, because as you can imagine, the biggest issue that we're having, that the VLCCs and the ultra-large carriers that are bringing most of the crude oil, for example, that you could potentially reposition from that area to either refineries in Europe or in Asia to produce helium or anything else that is needed, like fertilizers and urea and all that kind of stuff. They're not able, those mega vessels, to pass through the canal in Egypt. So that's why it's really important to maintain at least the passage in the Bab al-Mandeb, as you said, open, because otherwise it's going to be a real problem. Because thankfully now, with the pipeline in Saudi, some oil products can be moved from the Gulf in the Red Sea.
Yeah, and with all that in mind, David, I mean, at what point do you see actually any effect of this on prices where you are and in other parts of Africa? And if it does continue along that trajectory, would you see political instability also being fomented?
Yeah.
More
So
than
of
likely.
course, some of the examples that we have already talked about are the immediate impacts we've seen on household prices. So how the fuel price hike is leading to more or higher transportation costs, and of course, with transport goes into everything. So already we have got a positive pressure on cost of living across. And when you have these price shocks, finding already an accumulated grievances within these nations or populations in Africa, for instance, that coupled together with poor or weak government response, or even a government that's visibly unable to respond, that creates a very highly unstable situation. So already we know that there are a number of pressures, given that there's zero buffer from a fiscal policy perspective, the collapsed aid architecture that's negatively influencing how governments respond, and their ability to respond already provides for heightened risks of instability across countries in Africa.
Joseph, just staying on the theme of politics, I mean, let's not forget that US farmers are going to be paying much more for fertilizers. That's going to feed through into costs in supermarkets. Not a good time when you look ahead to the midterm elections coming up, is it? Considering those very farmers are quite often the base of Donald Trump.
GOP wipeout.
That's certainly the case. And I think for for spring plantings, a lot of farmers in the U.S. buy inputs in the fall right after harvest when they have cash on hand, and they'll buy fertilizer then. So a lot of farmers who are entering the planting season now are probably benefited from the fact that they bought their fertilizer several months ago. That said, there will be farmers who are still buying fertilizer. They will have choices. I think higher energy costs obviously are going to affect all farmers. I think that's the other main thing here, and David mentioned it and Stavros both mentioned, is that these are global markets. So when you're talking about prices rising, they're rising for pretty much everyone. And so I think this comes at a time when margins for farmers are quite low, and they're going to get worse because of higher input prices. The fact that urea prices have gone up 40%. The fertilizer cost for the average maize farmer in the U.S. is probably 35, 40% of its variable cost. So it will be a big concern for farmers.
Stavros, we haven't discussed Europe. What's likely the impact there?
In theory, the impact in Europe would be minimal because what Europe is importing in terms of crude oil from the Gulf is approximately 5%. But as we're living in a global market, or a global village, as I used to say, is that you have, for example, crude that's been destined for other locations or for Europe, for example, from other places around the globe, and probably that can be stilled, and I can put it in quotation. So, for example, we've seen examples from Nigerian oil or LNG departing from Europe and then making a U-turn while it was transiting to go to Asia, because Asia was offering higher prices. So that could probably create a potential problem to Europe. But of course, we have to see it more holistically. We have also to consider the cost of moving the energy products from point A to point B, because as you said in your introduction, the freight rates had increased dramatically, and that, of course, will increase even further the overall final goods.
Freight rates are insane.
Just to ask
Absolutely
about the
nuts.
impact of these closures of airspace in the Gulf in particular, which has some of the biggest cargo hubs in the world. What impact is that having? Because that seems like a double whammy. We've really been talking about shipping for the time being, haven't we?
True, even that I'm not a truly expert on aviation, but I have a good understanding about it. Of course, we're going to have exactly the same problem. And the good news is that with aviation, we move like only 1% of the global freight in terms of volume. In terms of value, of course, that's coming approximately 15%. So that means that high valuable goods, they usually been transferred with aviation, because the rest 85% comes with the maritime. So as you can imagine, the big chunk of goods are being transported with the maritime sector. But I don't want to underestimate the importance that freight cargo has, because high valuable equipment that we need, especially during crisis, has to be transferred. And especially as the airspace is closed, that makes the overall operation more difficult and more expensive. And that's why we've seen recently also the aviation freight rates going up.
Joseph, what's your take on that?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, I think the in terms of aviation, I think it's important, particularly for the Gulf countries themselves. Obviously, there's a big tourist industry. Those are big airline hubs in the Gulf, and that affects travel all for people around the world. So those will be. And the other thing with airline costs going up, it's already an expensive way to ship goods. So it presents even more problems, I think, in particular for getting food into that region.
Joseph, again, just very quickly, do you anticipate any countries actually to run out of food? Not totally, but you know what I mean.
No, I don't. I mean, I think it was mentioned all the various crises we've gone through over the last 10 or 15 years with the trade wars, with COVID, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and now with this, the closure of the Red Sea is mentioned. I mean, all these have created big disturbances that the markets have adjusted to, and I think that I don't think that we will
The
run out of
markets have
food.
adjusted to, but what about the people?
Run out of food. There may be some short-term problems, but I think the main thing will be that it will just be at a bigger cost. So the affordability question is far bigger, I think, than availability, which I think the market will take care of.
David, very quickly, what are you most worried about?
Well, we've sort of captured a bit of it, being that most countries within the African continent are not, do not have the pre-laid foundations to deal with this crisis, especially from a fiscal policy perspective, given that there's no zero fiscal buffer, but also the collapsed or collapsing aid architecture that exists on the continent will almost result in more people going into food poverty, especially. And then on the point of instability, given that this impacts at the center of costs of living for a lot of people living in Africa, it will likely add to additional pressures around political instability on the continent. So really, that's those risks are what perhaps might keep me up at night.
David Owiro, thank you. Stavros Karamperidis and Joseph Klauber, thanks all three of you for joining us. And that's our show for this week. Get in touch with us on X at Richard TV and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. Or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. But there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. Well, that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Rishad Salamat, and from the whole team in Doha, thanks for joining us. Stay tuned now for more of Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the war.
Welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining the stream tonight. Hope you enjoy it. Like and subscribe. Feel free to leave as many comments as you want. Be nice to each other.
Yet again was used as a ruse for war.
Critical debate.
Who betrayed the table? Who attacked the negotiations for the second time? For the third time during the talks we should be attacked? Who is talking about a greater country for itself? Israel, not Iran.
Iran has been a huge supporter of terrorism over the years. I really have to take exception to the idea that Iran is innocent in this.
Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
The war on Iran and the way it's being covered. Starting with the U.S., where the White House says the journalism is insufficiently patriotic and there is talk of treason in the air. Censorship is taking place across the board, ranging from self-censorship to the kind imposed by some of the states involved. And we focus on Lebanon.
Around 20% of Lebanon is displaced as we speak.
Which Israel is threatening to turn into the next Gaza, and where its soldiers are running amok once again. This week brought significant developments in the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. From the ongoing efforts to decapitate the leadership in Tehran, to the continued blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, and now major strikes on energy infrastructure across the region, bringing the conflict into a much more perilous phase. Our focus, as always here at The Listening Post, is on the journalism, what it's up against, the way the war is being covered. For reporters in the U.S., Israel, and Iran, the challenges differ, but they face the same reality. This war is escalating and has become a story in which propaganda, the projection of strength, can matter as much as military might does, which means that news organizations are under pressure from multiple sides, from vested interests shaping the narrative, to leaders who, for whatever reason, want to keep on fighting. The stakes are growing by the day, and the trajectory that this story takes could be affected by the decisions being made not just in war rooms, but in newsrooms.
The fog of war, the media war, the information war is very important for all sides to try to shape the narrative, especially in the United States, with increased pressure by the administration to shut down certain conversations critical of the war.
Trump's a fascist.
And we could do a lot worse.
Of course, he wants to shut down
Americans
the news.
know all about their corporate media
Except the
outlets,
friendly news.
self-censoring at times. But journalists there are unaccustomed to censorship,
Allowing his billionaire buddies to buy up everything.
by the government.
All the news
It is nothing new
outlets.
to Iranians where such restrictions are a fact of life. And whenever Israel finds itself at war, usually by starting one, journalists have to deal with military censors, telling them what they can or cannot report.
We have
But
that here
Americans
too.
have never had someone like Brendan Carr, who heads the U.S. broadcast regulator, threaten to pull the licenses of news outlets over their critical coverage of the war. At no time
They don't have
they
licenses.
had a secretary of war, let alone one who rants the way Pete Hegseth has, instructing journalists on the kind
Risky
of
Pete.
spin America's latest war effort requires.
For example, a banner or a headline, Mideast war intensifies. What should the banner read instead? How about Iran increasingly desperate?
President Donald Trump went further than that, saying some journalists should be charged with treason, a crime that in the U.S. is punishable by death.
The United States has very strong and broad protections for what you can actually publish if you're a member of the media, much more so than other Western countries. So they're going to find it hard to make good on this threat. But at the same time, just the fact that they're able to make this threat can have the intimidatory effect that they're looking for and lead media outlets to self-censor.
The U.S. government expects to be served by a mobilized media to advance the interests of the state rather than any considerations for professional journalistic standards. Although the Gaza genocide, much of the corporate media in the United States willingly forfeited its professional responsibilities.
All wars empower authoritarian tendencies, strengthen authoritarian moves. The war is also shutting down a free flow of information in Israel, ramping up the repression tactics in Iran. But for America, whose exceptionality lies in the free speech and the First Amendment, this represents more of a threat because U.S. society could move to look more like our adversaries than ourselves.
Or like their ally in this war, Israel. Military censorship there goes back decades. Journalists have had to deal with it during the genocide in Gaza, the ongoing attacks on Lebanon, but the conflict
Good thing
over
Bibi isn't
Iran
president of the
has
United
deepened
States.
those
Well, he kind of
restrictions.
is.
They now go beyond the clampdown on live coverage. The images Israelis are able to see of projectiles incoming from Iran.
The Israeli government does not allow us or want us to show where that may have come up.
They affect what Israelis are able to know about their military stockpiles. The very real concern that they have been depleted and that Israeli lives are now at risk because of that. The Netanyahu government does not want those vulnerabilities out there.
We're watching from above.
And the reporting is censored accordingly.
The Israeli military and the media shape everything that Israelis understand about the war. Certain live broadcasts have been shut down, and the police have actually been out searching for certain journalists. So there's a lot more of a crackdown. And Israeli journalists who don't comply can suffer from, serious penalization, arrest, equipment being taken away. But the truth is that Israeli journalists, most of them comply anyway, basically echoing the military narrative. They don't really question it.
We have numerous military analysts.
This will be starting here soon, thanks to
stating
Trump.
For months that depletion is a real risk. But if you look at the Israeli media, this is being presented as not factual information. I put my trust on military analysts who have repeatedly concluded that interceptors are in increasingly short supply and that replenishing them is going to be a very difficult task.
And a big part of it is, information warfare, psychological warfare, propaganda. There were reports in the last few days that Netanyahu was assassinated, and it was all over the internet, even though there was not even a target of that kind, as far as I know. But a lot of people started to believe that. And so the downside from the Israeli perspective of putting so much crackdown is that people start believing all types of things because there's no truth coming out.
Iran is out to plug leaks as well. Its police chief announced that 500 citizens have been arrested this past week for sharing information to, quote, hostile entities, which likely includes foreign news outlets. Tehran has allowed some of those news teams into the Islamic Republic, CNN and Sky News, but has walled off others like Iran International, which has far more viewers in Iran than Western outlets do. The Persian language channel that operates in exile out of London often provides a platform for Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, who wants his family to return to power. The channel has also been known to cozy up to the Israelis.
I believe in you. I respect you. I admire you. I know that Iran can be great again.
Iran is a deeply polarized society. You have liberal Iranians, some of whom were actually in favor of foreign strikes. And you have deeply committed Iranians supporting the government's war efforts. You have outside influence operations, the Mossad and media networks such as Iran International. And so Iran has tried to clamp down on that by criminalizing
some of those videos
any kind
of Bibi definitely look
statements
AI
to these
generated.
foreign channels.
Weird.
To try to shut down the leaks.
Iran has arrested several hundred people now and claims that they were leaking to the enemy. In wartime, espionage is regularly lobbed against not actual spies, but against journalists in an attempt to clamp down on inconvenient information getting out. They say, you're a foreign agent, we're going to put you in prison.
For all the lack of press freedom that the Iranian media has to endure, and the restrictions that foreign media in Iran are compelled to accept,
we came overland, among the only international journalists currently allowed in.
Iran has provided foreign media more access in Iran during wartime than Israel ever allowed in the Gaza Strip. For more than 2 years now, Israel has systematically prevented the entry of a single foreign correspondent into the Gaza Strip, unless basically going as an adjunct of the Israeli military.
Another massive humanitarian crisis.
30% of Americans approve of this war. At the outset of the Iraq War, the opposite was true. More than 70% supported it. Getting a country onto a war footing requires groundwork, militarily and psychologically. And John Bolton, who was the national security advisor during Donald Trump's first term, understands that. A notorious war hawk, Bolton also worked under George W. Bush. Last week, he told National Public Radio that one of the White House's failings on Iran was not, quote, preparing the American people ahead of the attack, the way he and the Bush administration did in 2003, when the U.S. media also played a major role, helping to push the bogus claims of Iraqi WMDs. Donald Trump is not seeing the same complicity in the coverage this time around. For the president and his administration, that's unpatriotic. Hence, the threats against journalists, the loose talk of treason.
What does any desperate leader who has launched a war that's gone them into hot water do? they resort to threats to try to silence the people who are reporting about this, rather than stop the root of the problem, which is the decision to go to war. And we should be very glad that reporters are not listening to the demands for a patriotic press. The highest level of patriotism really is the willingness to scrutinize an irresponsible and reckless government that is steering the country into disaster. That's what true patriotism is, I think.
A major part of this is propaganda. The media forming and controlling narratives, but it also means that programs such as yours are more important than ever, because ultimately the narrative that prevails ensures which side lasts longer in this conflict.
Israel is continuing its targeting of Iranian political leaders, killing 3 more senior figures there. Much of the coverage in Israel and across international media has ranged from the triumphalist to the awestruck, largely sidestepping the legal matter of how these assassinations violate international law. Meenakshi Ravi is here with more.
Extrajudicial killings have long been a central tactic of the Israeli state. This past week, Israel announced it had killed 3 senior figures, including the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Ali Larijani. The news zipped across Israeli outlets.
היד הארוכה של המודיעין הישראלי ושל כוחות הביטחון מגיעה לכולם.
מערכת המודיעין שלנו היא טובה מאוד, אנחנו ראינו את זה הבוקר עם החיסולים למשל, אבל אף פעם לא צפינו קריסה של משטר.
Beyond Israel, much of the media coverage focused on the sophistication of the operation, the intelligence gathering, the covert planning, the execution. What was largely missing was any serious discussion of legality. No state is authorized to kill a civilian from another country, even one in political office, even one accused of ordering violence. In the media's reporting on Larijani, the focus has been on his record, including his role in ordering the mass killing of Iranian protesters in January this year.
He was eliminated. Why this is important? Because this is the person who is in charge of the bloody crackdown.
Si ritiene che sia stato lui a dirigere la feroce repressione delle proteste.
Coverage like this is part of a wider pattern. When the Israelis kill their political enemies, 2 things are foregrounded: the sophistication of Israeli intelligence, particularly Mossad, and the crimes of those targeted. Social media posts like this one make the rounds. Benjamin Netanyahu, alongside US Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, taking pleasure in crossing names off the
Lauren,
list of
Trump doesn't
targets.
fight for anyone other than Trump.
Today, I
That's
raised
it.
2 names on the punch card.
At the end of every Trump rainbow is a pot of grift. That's all this is.
Killing as a numbers game.
There's
Where
something in it
targets
for
are
him at the
counted,
end.
Names are erased, and the question of legality disappears.
Thanks, Mina. There are millions of other people directly suffering the effects of this war without attracting much media coverage. The people of Lebanon. Israeli forces have begun ground operations there, and many fear that their goal is to occupy once again the southern part of the country. 1 out of 5 Lebanese citizens has already been forced from their homes. The UN says Israel has wounded or killed the equivalent of 1 classroom of school children per day. Having destroyed entire residential buildings in the middle of Beirut and bombed civilian infrastructure to isolate the south, Israel has also showered Lebanon with propaganda leaflets, boasting openly that it will turn the country into the new Gaza. One news outlet covering these developments is the Beirut-based Megaphone. Its co-founder and managing director, Jean Kassir, joins me now. The Israelis have forcibly displaced hundreds of thousands of people across a broad patch of South Lebanon. Talk to us about what's happening down there and how effectively are journalists able to report from that area?
Yeah, thanks for having me. To start, to give some fact and figures, around 20% of Lebanon is displaced as we speak. So it's 1 million people out of a 6 million people country. It's extremely difficult to report from the south. Israel is clearly trying to isolate the south. This comes after marking entire areas that amount to 15% of Lebanon in red on the map, which basically means an evacuation order for everybody within those areas, including a big city like Tyre and entire villages. So the intention is very clear. Nobody should get close to the south. It's extremely difficult to have an actual verification process and getting images that are directly from there. The only journalists who are still daring to go there, Most of them are foreign journalists, and most of them have to do it within a security framework. So either within the army or within also some tours organized by Hezbollah, or within special missions that are basically supported or protected by security personnel.
The Israelis are also bombarding the Lebanese with propaganda, with psychological warfare. Walk us through some of the things that they're doing on that score. How reminiscent is this of what we've seen in Gaza? Talk to us about some of the similarities, maybe the differences.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying the differences. Like, Gaza is a genocide, and it's very important out of respect for what the Palestinian people endured, not to make false comparisons. But the similarities, unfortunately, do exist. It starts with the mass evacuation, basically overnight asking the entire southern suburb of Beirut, which amounts maybe to half of Manhattan, to evacuate. It created a panic among people who flocked to the streets and ended up sleeping in their cars that night. The same happened with the evacuation order I mentioned in the entire southern Litani area. This also is coupled with fake calls asking for evacuation of specific building, which contributed psychological warfare. Add to it the constant buzzing of the drones above our heads, which creates a lot of ambient anxiety in the city, and this preceded the current escalation post-March 2. And finally, what we've witnessed a couple of days ago, which is the leaflets that were dropped from the sky from the warplanes, and those leaflets ask basically the Lebanese to scan a QR code and to join information WhatsApp groups that the Israeli army manages. We should also add to it the discourse of Israeli ministers such as Smotrich, who clearly threatened to turn the southern suburb of Beirut, Dahieh, into a new Khan Yunis. Which adds to a lot of rhetoric of erasure and annihilation that has been coming out of a lot of Israeli officials when talking about Lebanon. And finally, we have the media phenomenon, which is Arikhai Adrai, the former Arabic-speaking spokesperson of the Israeli army, which constantly not only threatens the Lebanese through those evacuation orders, but also engages with critics that are coming out of social media, which creates further fear. Imagine a person working for the Israeli army responding to a meme or responding to a joke that a comedian, for example, or a social media commentator would say about you. On the one hand, it tries to create some familiarity with the Lebanese audience, but on the other hand, I personally feel that is extremely threatening. It means that they're observing. It means that they're very much aware of all the
like I said,
conversation going
it's
on.
all a grift.
In
Trump's just
Lebanon's
in it
social
for
media
himself
landscape.
and for
And
his
finally,
buddies.
they try
That's
a lot
it.
to weaponize
Gonna build
the
another
legitimate
Mar-a-Lago
criticism
over
that
there or
exists
something.
in Lebanon against Hezbollah for their own propaganda and for their own discourse that they're here to liberate. While we all know that Lebanon has always been under a threat from Israel way before the existence of Hezbollah.
Well, let's dig into that angle right now, the way Hezbollah is perceived in Lebanon. There was a government directive this past week issued to state-run news outlets not to call the organization a, quote, resistance group. So how is Hezbollah perceived by the Lebanese people, by the government there, by the media, and beyond?
I mean, it's very important to mention the broader framework under which we are operating as journalists. We're covering an Israeli war, an Israeli aggression against a deeply divided country. And this division is not necessarily related to our stance toward Israel. I think most Lebanese do not see in Israel any potential ally. The overwhelming majority sees Israel as an aggressor. But the dispute is around Hezbollah's role. Hezbollah is multifaceted. Hezbollah used to be a very legitimate resistance movement up until the year 2000. Until it decided to become more hegemonic at the Lebanese level. And a lot of people who opposed Hezbollah's hegemony in Lebanon paid a very heavy price, including being killed. Another point of disagreement is Hezbollah's deep connection with the Iranian regime. And this is something that created a lot of backlash when the rockets were fired on March 2nd, because it was seen as a direct support for the regime at a time where Hezbollah remained quite passive over a year, when we had more than 10,000 Israeli violation of the ceasefire. We didn't see any rocket being fired. So there is a lot of attention around Hezbollah's role and Hezbollah's motives when it comes to its regional affiliation and also its local hegemony project.
Given all of that, Jean, the context, the politics, how freely are Lebanese journalists able to report on Hezbollah? Are there restrictions? Are there red lines, formal, informal? Is there censorship or self-censorship at play?
I mean, we're in a country that's deeply divided, so this kind of allows for a margin of criticism against the other party. This doesn't mean that Hezbollah has ever been a big fan of freedom of expression. I mean, a lot of journalists paid a very heavy price for their critical stances, the latest being Lokman Slim. But today, as we speak, the main threat on journalists is coming from Israel, because in the 2024 war, we had several of our colleagues that were assassinated, starting with Issam Abdullah, the photojournalist. I'm not saying this to deflect the attention that Hezbollah has clear authoritarian and hegemonic tendencies, but as we speak today, the main threat is coming from Israel.
The work that you do at Megaphone focuses on documenting everyday life under attack. Give us an idea of a recent story that has stood out for you, and how do these kinds of stories challenge the narrative that's out there on Lebanon of a fragmented or collapsing country?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't pick one, but I would pick maybe a theme that we're covering, which is the amazing grassroots solidarity efforts. Lebanon is kind of forgotten in this regional conflict. There's not a lot of money that's coming in, like it was the case in the 2024 war. It's still a country that is suffering from a very acute economic collapse. So people have been impoverished for the last 6 years, but still, despite the polarization that exists, despite the sectarian tensions that exist, we still find like remarkable solidarity efforts that are happening at the grassroots level, from community kitchens to initiatives that are providing shelter for migrant domestic workers or for queer people or for people who are not a part of the map of aid, to personal initiatives from restaurants or from shops that are providing washing machines for people who have left their homes, all sorts of grassroots initiatives. This is something that is showing a picture of the country, a country that is still possible. This is what I would call it. At times, the level of division in Lebanon makes you feel that this is an impossible equation. But when you see the solidarity happening organically, despite all forms of political divisions that exist, this is the kind of narrative that Megaphone is showing. We're not denying the divisions, but we're showing another facet of Lebanese society, one that is determined to be resistant to any form of aggression and to also provide aid and consider that any Lebanese displaced is a person that concerns us all.
Jean Kassir, Managing Director of Megaphone, thanks for speaking with us here at the Listening Post today.
Thank you.
And finally, another disturbing similarity between what is taking place in Lebanon and what Israeli soldiers showed of themselves in Gaza on social media. Once again, they are documenting through their phone cameras their appetite for looting homes, stealing personal property, playing with what they find there, including women's lingerie, all to further humiliate the Lebanese people they have already displaced or killed. Their behavior relies on impunity, allowing these soldiers to share these videos with no regard to the potential consequences, because in Gaza, there were none. The videos also serve as a reminder that in many cases, these are not full-time soldiers. There are thousands of reservists involved. They come from every corner of Israeli society, people who will soon return to civilian life, their day jobs, like this character. A doctor whose job it is to preserve Israeli lives when he is not taking and dehumanizing the lives of the other, and then bragging about it on social media.
In-depth analysis of the day's headlines.
Diplomacy, yet again, was used as a ruse for war.
Critical debate.
Who betrayed the table? Who attacked the negotiations for the second time? For the third time during the talks we should be attacked? Who is talking about a greater country for itself? Israel, not Iran.
Iran has been a huge supporter of terrorism over the years. I really have to take exception to the idea that Iran is innocent in this.
Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
Warning system allows the government to close
Al Jazeera, wherever you are.
shut down construction sites, but environmental groups say it's not enough.
Welcome all to the stream. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Al Jazeera with our live continuous coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran. I'm Sarah Khairat and it's great to have you with us. Iran strikes southern Israel, injuring dozens. The Israeli Prime Minister calls it a difficult evening of battle.
Whoa!
Iranian missiles target the city that's home to Israel's nuclear program. More than 50 people are injured in Dimona. Tehran says the attacks in response to US-Israeli strikes across Iran. A southern city and a major nuclear enrichment site have also been hit.
We not only took out the facility, but also destroyed intelligence support sites and missile radar relays that were used to monitor ship movements.
And a senior US naval commander says Iran's ability to attack ships in the Strait of Hormuz has been degraded.
Degraded but not destroyed, right? I mean, even though Trump says they're obliterated.
Airstrikes on cities in southern Israel have destroyed residential buildings and left dozens of people injured.
Whoa!
Oof.
An Iranian attack on the southern Israeli city of Dimona has injured more than 50 people. No damage has been reported to the nuclear facility nearby. Now, that strike came after Iran reported an attack on its Natanz nuclear site. That's the largest in the country.
Yes, he does. That's all he knows how to do is lie.
Has also come under rocket fire. Buildings are heavily damaged. At least 64 people have been injured, and rescue crews are still digging to free people trapped under the rubble.
And the war keeps
Israeli
spreading.
Prime Minister has posted a statement on social media saying, "This has been a very difficult evening in the battle for our future." And he also goes on to say, "Our prayers for the recovery of the wounded." Brock McBride is in the
Thoughts and
Jordanian
prayers, man.
capital of Amman,
Thoughts and prayers.
That's because Israel has banned Al
Give me a
Jazeera
break.
from reporting inside the country. He has this report on the attack on Dimona.
This was a very significant attack on what is a very strategically important city. Dimona is pretty much the home of Israel's nuclear program in the Negev desert down in the south of the country. It does appear that from this salvo, one ballistic missile got through defenses and there was a direct strike. But we also understand that there were several other impacts reported around the city. The number of casualties has been put now at over 50, most of those requiring hospital treatment, with one 12-year-old boy said to be in a very
How can they
serious
still be
condition
launching
with,
attacks?
shrapnel injuries. This is according to
Someone want to explain
the
that to
Iranians
me?
in retaliation
Other than
for this
Trump
attack on
lies?
Natanz, its nuclear facility. Now Israel has said it didn't take part in that. That was an American operation. But Israel has
Thanks, Oren.
accepted responsibility for other attacks. For example, recently an
Don't
attack
forget to
on
like
what
and
they say
subscribe,
was a
buddy.
nuclear weapons research center at a university in Tehran. And Dimona has been the subject of attacks throughout.
The channel has
Saturday.
lots of
There have been a
content you're
total
gonna
of
hate.
7 air raid alerts being raised in the city as missiles were trying to get through. I think during this one of the last salvos on Saturday evening, this is when these missiles and debris managed to get through the defensive screen. And given the importance, the strategic importance of this city, and also the fact that Israel prides itself on intercepting a high ratio of incoming missiles, there is going to be an investigation into how this missile could get through.
All right, well, for more, let's now hand over to Alan Fisher, who's live for us in Washington, D.C.
It's a busy day in the Middle East, as it always is. And we have Donald Trump in the last hour posting on his Truth social media platform saying that he is ahead of schedule. And this comes just 24 hours or so after he said that he was well ahead of schedule and could possibly end the war. But he wasn't going to offer a deal just yet. Well, joining me live now here in Washington is Sina Azori, who's the Director of Middle East Studies at George Washington University here in Washington. Sina, has the US government managed to achieve its goals? Do we know what its goals are?
We don't know what those goals are, but if we go to...
Yeah, MAGA's not too bright, Chen.
According to what the government, the administration has been saying...
What goals?
And look at the objectives, I don't believe that the U.S. has been able to achieve them. Let us go back to what Donald Trump was saying.
Achieve
that he
what?
demanded unconditional
We've achieved
surrender
nothing
from Iranians.
except getting American kids
seen
killed.
The opposite happening, and Iranians have steadily escalated.
And wasting billions of dollars.
That Iranians launched against the city where the nuclear reactor is, Dimona. So Iranians have clearly not surrendered. They've been escalating. And I believe that the president is losing the control of this war.
First of all, let me ask you about what Donald Trump has said, because he says we've destroyed their Air Force and they have aerial superiority over Iran. They've attacked the places where they were building ballistic missiles, and that seems to be the case as well. The Navy is largely at the bottom of the sea. These are pretty big goals in such a short period of time. He seems to be, as he says, ahead of schedule.
He is ahead of schedule.
Yet
in terms
Iran
of,
keeps fighting.
Destroying
so what did we accomplish?
Iranian Air Force, Iranian Navy, but Iran is not fighting with those. The ballistic missile program has been quite active.
They're not getting 200 billion.
It's been well dispersed around the country.
Fuck them.
And the administration claims that 77% of Iran's ballistic missile arsenal has been destroyed. But there is 23% that is still launching, and is launching quite effectively against the Israelis, against the region, Qatar, UAE, everybody in the region, unfortunately, has been suffering. This is why I'm saying that the U.S. is not winning the war. For Iran, as long as they don't lose or do not give a decisive victory to the Americans, they can claim victory. But the U.S. needs a definitive and a decisive victory to be able to win the war.
Now, on Friday, we saw the U.S. administration say that they were going to lift sanctions on Iranian oil. I mean, that's a sign.
Make that one make sense.
That this wasn't planned out.
We're going to lift sanctions on oil of a country we're at war with.
The way you would expect this to be played out stage after stage after stage.
Well, I can tell you that I never imagined
Trump would
that
fuck up a free
Trump
lunch.
would lift sanctions on Iranian oil at the time that it's fighting Iran. So it's kind of unusual. But I believe that the president suffers from what most leaders suffer during wartime, and that is illusions of quick victory. We now know that the chairman of Joint Chief of Staff, General Kane, had told him that Iranians might try to close the Strait of Hormuz, and he had dismissed it, saying that the Iranians will capitulate sooner than that. That hasn't happened. So I don't believe that the president's plans have gone accordingly, and this is the nature of war. You can start the war when you want, but it never goes according to what you planned ahead of time. As Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan unless you get punched in the face.
A very famous quote, which I've used on air several times myself. Is there the reality for Donald Trump that he thought this would be like Venezuela or Midnight Hammer, where there were quick wins and big wins for him, big wins for his administration? It's not quite turned out this way from here, has it?
Not at all. I mean, both of them were relatively at low cost. The U.S. didn't suffer anything in Venezuela or the Midnight Hammer. I mean, think of it. U.S. forces were present on Iranian airspace during Operation Midnight Hammer only for 45 minutes. We are 21 days into this war, and the Iranians have not capitulated. They're clearly escalating. They've been able to hit Qatar, UAE, Saudis. They've been able to intercept a U.S. F-35 stealth aircraft that is not supposed to be, detected or intercepted. So clearly, Iranians have been fighting because they believe that they're fighting for their survival. And the demand that the president
the regime
has
is
put
definitely
forward,
fighting
that is
for its survival.
unconditional
Doesn't have a
surrender,
choice now.
They're not willing to accept it.
Can't surrender.
Well, Donald Trump said in his Truth Social post that
Trump
the
backed him into
Iranians
a
are
corner.
looking for a deal. What would any deal look like beyond the stop bombing us?
I think that they want a more stable, long-term political settlement, because in their view, June 2025 conflict and this war are the continuation of the same process for regime change. This is why they don't want to stop fighting or accepting a ceasefire, knowing that the Americans and the Israelis might come back 6 months from now again, and they're going to have to go through the same process again. This is how they're thinking, and this is why we're seeing that they're lashing out really strong at the entire region.
How much can we put the blame of the current war, if blame is the right word, with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner? They're not experienced negotiators. The Omanis have said that they didn't think that Witkoff understood the idea of enriching uranium and what that was all about. Should Donald Trump have picked better people to negotiate with the Iranians in the first place?
Absolutely. I mean, neither Jared Kushner nor Stephen Witkoff are experts on nuclear issues, whereas the Iranian counterpart, Foreign Minister Araghchi, has been involved with Iran's nuclear file for more than a decade. And we now know that he tried at the meeting that they had several times, tried to explain to them the nuclear fuel cycle and how it works. They were not, knowledgeable with nuclear issues. And of course, when you don't know how nuclear issues work, whatever offer you give them, they can't accept it. The problem is that this administration has put nuclear weapons, having nuclear weapons and nuclear enrichment as synonymous, whereas they're not actually synonymous. They're two different things. You can have nuclear weapons if you enrich, but having enrichment doesn't mean that you're having nuclear weapons. And this is why we're having this problem. Think of it, JCPOA took years for Iranians, the Americans, and the P5 permanent members of the Security Council to negotiate. So with nuclear experts, sanctions experts, but you can't negotiate with someone who has no expertise on nuclear issues or international politics.
Well, just let me remind our viewers, the JCPOA was what Donald Trump calls the very bad Barack Obama deal, which limited what Iran could do when it came to developing not only enrichment of uranium, but what they could do as far as their missile program was concerned. Is there a reality that the Iranians are emboldened by how well they've done to this point? Because we're hearing reports of executions being carried out for those that were protesting earlier this year. The people that Donald Trump said, we've got your back, we will take action if we have to. Are they emboldened in thinking, we're just going to do what we do?
Well, as I said, they believe that victory for them is survival. And for now, after 21 days of constant bombardment, but 2 nuclear weapon states, they've survived. And I think they're becoming more confident in their military operations. We had that report that the Iranians had launched against Diego Garcia, but then you had the F-35. Now they claim that they shot that they targeted an Israeli F-16. Now they targeted the Dimona. So they're clearly escalating, which you can tell us that they're acting with more confidence in the war. For them, again, survival is victory. And I'm afraid that this regime was never in human rights or democracy, but I think at the end of this war, we're going to see more political repression because the system is now more entrenched with more military people being in charge.
Was there a lack of understanding of what could possibly go wrong if there was to be a popular uprising in Iran? Because if we go back to when Khomeini took over, the people that at that point were described as really militant Islamists came very close to taking over the country. Is there an ignorance perhaps among some people in Washington and also elsewhere about what a new Iran would look like if they were successful?
Well, the fact that the president has dismissed several warnings from his own people in the administration, the fact that he claimed in the Oval Office that his best experts, that's the word
Trump knows more about Iran than anybody in history. Just ask him.
Iran's reaction can tell us how much there's a scarcity of expertise on Iran in this town.
And of course, we're hearing that there were reports of an attack on the Natanz, a nuclear site in Iran. That's a pretty serious escalation, because we were told that the Iranian nuclear weapons program was done. It was finished. It had been, in the words of Donald Trump, obliterated.
That's what he claimed, but then he also came out and said that there was a threat of Iranian nuclear program, and both statements cannot be factually true. Only one of them can be true. But in terms of attacking Natanz, and the Bushehr nuclear reactor, there's clearly an escalation, although the reactor at Bushehr has not been directly hit, but there have been two projectiles that have landed very close to it, 200 meters and 350 meters, which is very dangerous. If the reactor is hit, the radioactive material that can be dispersed around, around the GCC countries, it's extremely dangerous. And I think the reason that the Iranians targeted the Dimona, that's the city near that nuclear facility, is to clearly send a signal and a message that we are able to attack you and your nuclear facilities. You better stop, or else our next attack will be at the reactor. This is why I believe they're targeting it.
Let me just say, if you're joining Al Jazeera, I'm Alan Fisher, live in Washington with extended coverage of what is happening in the Middle East and Israel and the United States war on Iran. Live with me here in the studio is Sina Azodi, who's the Director of Middle East Studies at George Washington University. Sina, is there the possibility that Donald Trump, America's power in the Middle East, changes because of what's happening here? Because we've seen his call to allies to help open up the Strait of Hormuz be largely ignored. People tell him this is a war you started without our consultation.
Nobody wants to clean up his mess.
In your expert opinion, of what the Middle East looks like in years to come?
I believe, well, first of all, it is usually the case that you talk to your allies first, then you start the war, not that you start the war, then you talk to allies. That's how it should work. But I believe that at the end of this war, regional dynamics will change. Because for years, the GCC countries viewed the presence of American bases as an asset to protect them against Iranians. That clearly has not happened. In fact, we've seen that those bases have become a liability for these countries. They're being targeted because they host American bases. This is the perception. But from the Iranian perspective, they believe that, yes, they've been hit, they've been bruised, they've been bleeding, but once the war ends, they're going to stay there for a while, as they've been there for thousands of years.
Trump is a horrible domestic leader, King.
Reorient its policy. It will ultimately leave the region, and
He's
they
a
have
lunatic.
more freedom of action. The Iranians will have more freedom of action in the region once the Americans leave.
One more question. Are the Iranians overplaying their hand by attacking their neighbors like Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Dubai, because the Saudis in the last couple of days have expressed their frustration at what is going on? Is there a possibility that suddenly the people that they thought might be reasonably friendly to them could unite against them?
Absolutely. I think there is a growing frustration within, the GCC countries, Saudi Arabia. We just saw that, the Qataris and I believe there's the Saudi having good relations with them.
Sina Azodi, who is the Director of the Middle East Studies Programme at George Washington University, thanks for joining us. And I hope after that you feel a little bit smarter. I know I certainly do. But now let's go back to Sarah Hayrat at our global headquarters in Doha.
All right, thanks very much, Alan Fisher there in Washington, D.C. Well, Israeli troops are simultaneously expanding their ground offensive in southern Lebanon. Airstrikes targeted several houses and commercial shops in the district of Tyre. More than 1,000 people have been killed so far in Lebanon. Bernard Smith has more from the Lebanese capital, Beirut.
Hezbollah doesn't tell us how many casualties it suffered or what sort of damage it suffered. Israel's military speculates on the numbers of fighters it's killed, but there's no way of getting independent verification of it. It's worth saying this evening that Hezbollah has said that it's been fighting with Israeli forces with medium and long-range weapons for the town of Hayam, which is a strategically important town. It's high up. Israel, in previous confrontations with Hezbollah in previous wars, has tried to take this town. It's never tried to manage it. It's strategically important because if Israel gets it, it cuts off Hezbollah's supply routes from the east to the south. Hezbollah needs to keep it because it gives this panorama view over southern Lebanon and northern Israel. And it is fair to say that since the last conflict, Hezbollah has been weakened. Its traditional supply lines from Iran through Syria have been cut off. So it is in a weakened position, but impossible to say exactly how so.
Saudi Arabia has given an Iranian military attaché and 4 other diplomats 24 hours to leave the country as Iran keeps up attacks on
You
its
can't
Gulf
blame them.
neighbors.
I mean,
A
when they're
series
getting
of
hit,
drone and missile strikes have targeted Saudi Arabia. Air defenses
what
in
war
Kuwait
does.
and the United Arab Emirates have also carried out several interceptions. Rasool Sardar is following the latest developments from Riyadh.
We have seen another statement from the Ministry of Defense saying that 4 more Iranian drones have been intercepted by Saudi air defenses. So far, in the last 24 hours, there have been nearly 60 drones that were fired from Iran towards Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi authorities here are saying that all of them have been intercepted. Indeed, just a couple of hours ago, I was talking to a Saudi retired general in the armed forces of the country, and he was expressing the confidence in the country's capability of defending the nation here. And he was saying that the country has one of the most sophisticated and, of course, strongest air forces in the region. But having said that, the majority of drones so far have been particularly aimed at the eastern province of the country is important because the overwhelming majority of the country's energy facilities and resources are located in the eastern province, including the export terminals and the processing plants. But Saudi Arabia, compared to the other Gulf countries, has an advantage. And that it has an alternative. Through the Red Sea also it can transfer or transport its energy. So 30% of Saudi energy, indeed, it is being transported to the world through the Red Sea. But Iranian drones or missiles are not only targeting the eastern province, but just in recent days we have seen that escalating attacks on the city of Yanbu, which is a coastal city and is hosting important energy facilities of Saudi Arabia. So here, this is definitely putting a huge pressure on the Saudi economy because the energy is the economic lifeline of the country. And of course, while all of that is happening, so the rift between Riyadh and Tehran is also further growing.
Iran has denied targeting a joint British-US military base in the Indian Ocean. The UK's Ministry of Defence says the attack on Diego Garcia Island, which is more than 5,000 kilometres from Tehran, was unsuccessful. British Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper said the UK would continue to provide defensive support against what she's called reckless Iranian threats. Despite Tehran's denial, Israel says the attack highlights Iran's ability to strike well beyond the Middle East.
Iran launched a 2-stage intercontinental ballistic missile with a range of 4,000 kilometers at an American target on the island of Diego Garcia. These missiles are not intended to strike Israel.
Yes,
Their
he
range
is, Zeta.
reaches European capitals.
Yes, he is.
Berlin, Paris, and Rome are all within direct threat range.
Following the attack on Diego Garcia, the UK Prime Minister has told Cyprus the US won't be allowed to use the British airbase on the island to attack Iran. The RAF Akrotiri base was hit by an Iranian drone earlier in the conflict. And in a phone call with the Cypriot president, Keir Starmer said the facility wouldn't be part of its agreement with the United States to use British bases for defensive strikes on Iranian missile sites. Sonia Gallego has more from London.
The phone conversation on Saturday between the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the Cypriot President Nikos Christodoulidis was all about trying to ease the political tensions that have erupted since the start of this war.
Yeah, these poor people don't want bombs dropping on their country
the security
because of Trump.
situation in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Cyprus as well. Of course, Cyprus being targeted by what UK authorities said was Hezbollah drones from Lebanon as well. That caused an enormous amount of consternation for the Cypriot leadership as well. And only 2 days ago, the president himself, the Cypriot president, said that after this particular war, that perhaps it was time for Cyprus to reconsider the presence of those UK bases on the island as well. That, of course, has set alarm bells off in the UK as well, because Cyprus is also a strategic part for the UK as well. It is enormously important. It has carried out missions from Akrotiri to Syria and to Iraq as well. So while tensions are attempting to be allayed by this phone conversation as well, there is also still the determination to try and resolve these hostilities via diplomatic means as well. with the Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying that they would only act on a defensive measure and that the only way to resolve this crisis would be through diplomatic means. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera, London.
All right, well, let's take a look at some other news. A Ukrainian delegation has been holding talks with US officials to end the war with Russia. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says his team has been speaking to US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and also Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Russian forces have continued targeting Ukrainian cities. A Russian drone strike has killed 2 people in the city of Zaporizhia. 2 children were also injured in that attack.
Fuck Putin, too.
I stopped
He's
believing
a piece
a long
of shit.
time ago. When will this all just end? When will they finally reach an agreement? How long can they keep negotiating? Just give it to the Russian side so hard that it hurts them as much as it hurts us.
Former FBI Director and Special Counsel Robert Mueller has died aged 81. He served under several administrations and was credited with major structural and cultural changes at the FBI, but he's best known for leading the high-profile federal investigation into Russian
And Trump's comment about
in the
this guy's death is
2016
absolutely
presidential
disgusting
election.
and pathetic.
Trump has posted on
The
social
next time
media
some
saying
MAGA
he is
troll gets on
glad
you about laughing at Charlie Kirk's death,
Last year, the US
point him to
suspended
this.
most of its foreign aid, affecting more
Fuck
than
Trump.
$12 billion in annual support to Africa. Instead of donor-driven aid, the US is now offering transactional agreements. Aaron Mutasa reports from Zimbabwe's capital, Harare.
It's visiting hour at Sally Mugabe Hospital, and people are going to see friends and relatives who are sick. Like many public health care facilities in Zimbabwe, there are shortages of TB drugs and essential medicines. The government has for decades struggled to fund its public health care sector. Rumbidzai Pondamari gets her antiretroviral drugs for free from humanitarian agencies. She worries global cuts to funding and aid could lead to shortages. When she heard her government had rejected a $367 million deal with the United States, she panicked.
Buying pills at the pharmacy costs $15 to $20. I can't afford that. If I stop taking these HIV drugs, I will die.
Government officials in Harare say
You might
they
not be
refused
wrong,
the
Jennifer.
so-called health
You might not be wrong.
because Washington demanded access to Zimbabweans' biological samples for research. Politicians say there is no guarantee Zimbabwe will have access to vaccines or treatments that might be developed from data collected from Africans and sent to the US.
Can't you see that we're going back to the slave trade days, where actually our able and strong men were supposed to go there and help the West in their economic development, because here maybe they were not needed according to them. Those types of racial undertones and slave trade type of attitudes is what we thought were being projected here.
These are some of the African countries in negotiations with the US for billions of dollars in new funding. In exchange, the US wants access to critical minerals and control over sensitive health data.
Minerals.
Zimbabwe isn't the only nation with concerns, though.
Rare
Kenya was the first to sign, but withdrew after a court raised concern about how citizens'
it's all
personal
about.
information would be handled. Zambia halted talks because the deal was tied to sharing sensitive data and control of mining interests. The US says the funds will be released directly to African governments rather than to aid agencies, as was often the case in the past, over a 5-year period. They will support programs on HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and epidemic preparedness. It also says Americans must benefit from the exchange, but it's not clear how. Zimbabwe needs help to fund its HIV programs, but politicians say if that means handing over personal health data, then Washington can keep its money.
You might be right, Stanley. You might be right.
All right, stay with us because the news
But
does
Trump's still a
continue here
pig.
in about 30 minutes. Up next is Inside Story.
The United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
This is the second time that we negotiated with Americans and they decided to attack us right in the middle of negotiation.
This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat
Donald Trump has just launched America into a full-scale conflict without a plan, without authorization for Congress, or even a debate in full view of the American people.
With tensions escalating, stay with Al Jazeera for the latest developments. On counting the cost from factories to supermarket shelves, the Iran war is disrupting global supply chains. Goods are being delayed and costs are rising, and it could soon hit your dinner table. Will the conflict trigger the next global food shock? Counting the cost on Al Jazeera.
Will the Houthis join Iran in its war against the US and Israel? The Yemeni armed group says it's ready for any developments in the ongoing confrontation. Given their proximity to the Red Sea, what could the Houthis' involvement mean for this vital maritime route? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. As the US-Israeli war against Iran drags on, Yemen's Ansarallah, also known as the Houthis, have stayed out of the conflict. But that could change. They've said they consider themselves directly concerned and could take a position alongside Tehran. The armed group controls much of Yemen and in recent years has attacked Israel and commercial ships in the Red Sea. If a new front opens up, many fear that global trade would be disrupted even further in another maritime gateway. Shipping is already largely halted in the Strait of Hormuz, causing significant losses worldwide. So will the Houthis join the war? What difference could that make for the volatile region? We'll discuss these issues when our guests join us in just a moment. But first, this report from Imogen Kimber.
Iranian flags on the streets of Sana'a, a show of support from the Yemeni armed group Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis.
Our message to America and Israel is that we will not abandon Iran and Lebanon.
This guy needs a haircut.
We came out in support and solidarity with the Iranian people. We are all one body and one shield to confront America and Israel.
Iran supported the Houthis in their push to take power in Yemen. And earlier this month, the movement's leader pledged to stand with Iran, which is under attack from the US and Israel. Abdul Malik al-Houthi also said any aggression against Iran was aggression against the entire region. Back in November 2023, the armed group used its proximity to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to support Palestinians in Gaza who were under bombardment by Israel. Its fighters commandeered vessels linked to Israel, effectively blocking international shipping. Transport and logistic companies were forced to use far longer routes, causing major disruptions to the global supply chain and billions of dollars in losses. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait is a choke point in the Red Sea between Africa and the Middle East. More than 10% of global maritime trade passes through it.
Lots of choke
the US
points.
launched two operations to end the assault, but they were unsuccessful. Instead, it reached a truce, and the Houthis agreed to stop targeting international shipping. The armed group is Iran's most powerful non-state ally. Since its war on Gaza began, Israel has significantly
I don't know, Mark.
reduced the
The
capabilities
war is very
of both Hamas
unpopular
and
here,
Hezbollah.
and troops on the ground will just make it more unpopular. But Trump is nuts, so he'll probably do
Iran's
it.
obstruction of the Strait of Hormuz would be catastrophic. So what they decide to do will be critical, not just for Iran and the region, but for the whole world. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's meet our panel of guests who are joining us to discuss all of this further today on Inside Story. And joining us from London, Faria Al-Muslimi, a research fellow in the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House. In Jeddah, Khalid Batafi, a political analyst who specialises in Saudi foreign policy. And in Medford, Massachusetts, Rockford Weitz, Professor of Practice and Director of the Fletcher Maritime Studies Programme at Tufts University. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. Khalid, if I can start with you, what would it mean?
Sanctions, Stanley? Who? Iran? Trump is lifting sanctions on their oil sales.
Well, it means a lot of trouble because the Houthis is controlling Al-Mandeb Strait.
And before that, in the 12th days war, they attacked all the ships on the Red Sea, and it became very costly and very expensive. The same with the Suez Channel. So right now we only have this option to export our oil via Yanbu and the Red Sea down to Bab el Mandeb and north to Suez Channel, and that's mean we would be cut off. But I believe there is pressure on the Houthis from the inside and the outside, we included, not to join, and they showed wisdom so far for not joining.
Faria, I mean, for the US and for Israeli military planners, and I guess for people who have got money invested in stock markets all around the world, the Houthis joining would be the worst case scenario, would it not?
It would be obviously an additional nightmare to an already bloody war and costly
Gotcha,
in the
Stanley.
Middle East.
Gotcha.
However, the Houthis have been hesitant not to join for 4 to 5 reasons. The first has to do with narrative, the second has to do with economy and incentive, and another one has to do with the military, but also the added value possibly of them. First, the Houthis have had fought many wars internally and externally, but they always, from their own narrative, have to have a domestic, local reasoning for it. And they cannot afford looking like in defense of the Persians. They do not have the same theological and reporting relationship with Iran as Hezbollah does, or BMF, or other Shiite militias in the region, despite being an extremist jihadi group. But also they are waiting for the roadmap and for a possible roadmap resuming with Saudi Arabia, which will give them huge economic incentives. So they have a lot at stake to lose. And number 3, I think we shall not forget that they are still militarily blind because of the last year's attacks and airstrikes by the United States of America. It did had a lot of harm on their military and communication capabilities, and they have a truce that they have sponsored by Oman, and that's another reason why they cannot throw all of that and just show up into the sea. Should there be strikes on them, I'm sure they will move on a moment, or if things goes bad in which the Gulf countries start to attack Iran back, there is a possibility they will jump. But so far, in addition to not clear about their added value to this militarily, Iran does not need so far a +1 into this war. Because of all of this, they have practiced restraints, and they have kind of kept themselves in the reserves. And I think they will do for some time at the moment, unless, again, they are striked ahead or a GCC goes into a direct possible confrontation with Iran. But until then, for this domestic, economic, military, and added value reasons, they have practiced a strategic patience, and I think they will do for the time being.
OK, Rockford, I mean, there is a similarity, is there not, between the Houthis and Iran in any potential conflict if the Houthis were to join it. They have geography on their side. It's a major strategic asset where they are in the world.
That's correct. I agree with the analysis of both of my colleagues on this discussion, but I agree with you as well that the Houthis have geography on their side, and they're certainly able to use asymmetric warfare, so non-conventional warfare, in the same way that the IRGC it plans to do that in the Strait of Hormuz. So they would be their goal, I think, would be to disrupt commercial shipping. And I would just add to the discussion, essentially, the implications would be on 2 different levels: the regional level, especially for Saudi Arabia with those exports going through, as Khalid said, but then also for the Suez Canal and for Egypt. So those would be the regional implications. And then the global implications would be further price pressure on oil prices going up, further disruptions of global trade, including some deciding to pass around the Cape of Good Hope on their way to Europe instead of through the Suez Canal. So it would be, if it happens, it would be very disruptive, and it would complicate the current war.
Khaled, there are lots of unknowns here. We don't know, do we, exactly what the Houthis have in terms of weaponry, in terms of missiles, in terms of drones. They were hammered by the US last year. We don't know what is left. But on the other side of this, if the Houthis were to join, then they too, if they were involved in a military action, would be greatly depleting the air defences that the US and Israel rely on, not only to protect Israel, but to protect places like where you are and where I am in Doha.
Yeah, that's true. But on the other side, the Houthis are afraid of the other Yemeni factions. Sharia now is controlling all the factions, and they are ready. So they have to worry about their territory from being attacked, whether
I don't know,
from
Stanley. How long do you think it would take Israel to try to attack us?
Or by other factions like or other parties like the United States or Israel. So they are in a very sensitive time right now, and they should wait and see because Iran is being deintegrated and the leadership is being killed. And all the people they know in Iran and they coordinate their actions with the Houthis are gone. So if I were in their shoes, I would wait and see what happened next. If Iran survived miraculously, then I might think again. But if Iran, like what we see now, is being disintegrated and all the leaders I know are lost in action, so then I will choose to be with the Saudis, who are going to be the next rulers of the game. And Saudis showed in decades their readiness to help without conditions. They are readiness to stabilize Yemen and to support Yemen. So if I were Houthi, I would wait for my rewards from the winner side.
Faria, I mean, after October the 7th, the Houthis were involved in attacks on Israel and on global shipping. And then there was a sustained US campaign. There had been earlier airstrikes by the US and Israel and the UK, for that matter. A sustained air campaign last year, which ended in May, Operation Rough Rider. At the end of that, I mean, the Houthis seem to have come out quite well out of that, didn't they? I mean, the US decided to give that up because things weren't going all that well for the US. They were losing using up a lot of munitions. It cost them a lot of money, and they lost 7 drones, I think, during that 6-week campaign.
Well, the Houthis showed up to the Red Sea because to them they could not afford not showing up for Palestine. That's a different calculation domestically wise. But in that case, in fact, it was another example in which Iran originally have asked them not to intervene and not to escalate in the Red Sea. And however, they moved despite Iran's will at the moment because they had enough reasons domestically and regionally to project power of that. However, what I would warn off is that while now the Iranians have a less of a command and control over the Houthis because most of IRGC and Hezbollah commanders have left Yemen over the last year and the Houthis enjoy a certain level of independence, there has been cases in the past, just like the opposite in October 7, there has been cases in 2015 in which the Houthis did not want to escalate, but IRGC cells in Sana'a decided to escalate specifically against Saudi Arabia. So there has been incidents in the past in which things gets out of the Houthis' control despite their mathematics. However, I would not also only count as a threat coming out of the Red Sea or of Yemen exclusively out of the Houthis. The Iranians have invested in a lot of different Yemeni aspects inside Yemen. They have different cells and they have different relationships across the Horn of Africa, from pirates to smugglers to different religious and militia groups. So I would not be surprised to see that despite the Houthis well at one point that it will escalate in the longer term. And of course, that was an uncalculated war for the Houthis, but as a group, it does not mind functioning in a war specifically because it brings it allows it to avoid its domestic pressure and its domestic situations. I do disagree that they are worried at the moment from the other Yemeni factions. I think they are beyond comfortable in that side. But what they are afraid of, which is possible, highly possible, is in the long term, even if they are spared this round because of their choice or Iran's choice, they are for sure aware that they will not be spared the next round. And I believe Israel's next target after Iran will actually be the Houthis. By then, they will go far and beyond, and they will use the Red Sea again. But also, I think they would, despite the fact that they have been weaker in matter of technological pieces of weapons from Iran the last year, they still manufacture a lot domestically. They have mobilized a huge amount of fighters over the last year, and they have been collecting revenues and spending zero salaries. So definitely, it is a bit weaker in the communication, in the specific militarily technological pieces, but it's still, by now, it has localized its manufacturing, and it actually has a huge financial resources, along with a zero responsibility of spending these financial resources. So even if they are at the moment quiet, I would not take that as a long-term strategy.
Khaled, I mean, when that ended, that US operation, which was a really heavy bombardment by the United States, Operation Rough Rider, there was a truce. And when Donald Trump announced that truce back on the 5th of May last year, he said, "We hit them very hard and they had a great ability to withstand punishment." You could say there was a lot of bravery there, almost a bit of admiration from Donald Trump about the way the Houthis acquitted themselves.
We shall see, Stanley. We shall see.
Well, he could have the same admiration for the Afghanis. It's the territory, it's the culture, it's who they are.
Another nationwide power outage in Cuba, thanks to Trump,
of
creating another humanitarian crisis, so we could build another Mar-a-Lago.
Be used as
good job, Don.
Hidden
good job.
caves and hidden underground and all of that, and they have history of that. I mean, ask the Egyptian. They tried and tried when they have the best army in the Arab world, but they failed to get in.
Hang on, guys.
Mines against ships. They need things that they cannot hide forever and not depend on surviving only to continue the fight. And I think this is been depleted by the Americans and by not allowing the outside world, and by that I mean Iran, to export materials to them. And Hezbollah is not in a shape or form to support them. So
okay,
today they are
Khaled,
not
if I
like
could bring
before.
in Rockford on one of the points you made there. You say they need lots of missiles, lots of resources they don't have. Rockford, do they? Because in many ways, this is about the threat, is it not? You know, even if they fired one missile, then shipping companies are then going to worry about their insurance, worry about their ships.
That's right.
And you
Insurance is going to keep going up. All they have to do is threat.
Double blow when
That's
you've
it.
already got the Strait of Hormuz.
Hit one
closed.
ship, everything stops.
Yes, you're correct. So what the Houthis could do is just the threat and credible threat, a risk to shipping would cause some of those marine insurers that sort of famously
Stable
canceled their
genius.
coverage for the Strait of Hormuz. They could cancel the coverage through the Bab el-Mandeb. That would probably come back as it has in the Strait of Hormuz. But even then, the commercial shipping would be reluctant to take the risk. And one reason it might be more profound as an impact in the Red Sea is that there are alternatives to going through the Bab el-Mandeb, where that doesn't really exist with the Strait of Hormuz beyond the pipelines that cross Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So there's no maritime alternative to the Strait of Hormuz, whereas the Bab el-Mandeb does have a maritime alternative. So even though I agree with the analysis of my fellow panelists that they're certainly degraded after Operation Rough Rider, they certainly do need to be resupplied, and Iran is not in position to do that. But they still have something, right? And they have hidden some capacity, so they can, whether it's drones or mines or even small boat attacks, they would have that capability, even using some of the fishing vessels that would be along the coast, and then threatening shipping. The threat is what would have would trigger the commercial implications.
Khaled, I mean, yes, shipping, much of it could go the long way round Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope. That adds to most ships a couple of weeks, about 6,000 nautical miles. But in terms of energy, in terms of your country, that's not going to work, because right now you are using that pipeline to the Yanbu port as your back door to get your oil supplies out. That would be closed down, would it not, Khaled?
Well, close to Asia maybe, but still open to, hopefully, to Europe through the Suez Channel. But it is going to be terrible. I mean, I don't know if the world can stomach this. If China, for example, or Japan, or those who are reluctant to intervene can stomach this. And maybe that's pressure enough. They have relation, they have contact with the Houthi, and they will pressure them not to do that. Other than that, then either they have to join America in reopening the Hormuz, or joining the other Europeans and protect.
All right, guys, sorry, I muted this for a second. Trump just posted this on Truth Social. If Iran doesn't fully open without threat the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours from this exact point in time, the United States of America will hit and obliterate various power plants, starting with the biggest one first. Thank you for your attention in this matter. So Trump is now threatening to hit power plants in Iran if they don't fully open the Strait of Hormuz, even though Trump says that this war is completely won and over and we've accomplished all of our goals. There you go. Back to the broadcast.
All of that together, finance, but also narrative and ideological. But I think, again, it's always important to remember that.
What's up, Billy?
From Abdul Malik al-Houthi's point of
Welcome.
view, Khamenei is his
Welcome
proxy
back.
rather than the other way around. He does not feel theologically committed to Iran. He's in debt, of course, and he feels he owns them a lot. They have
Welcome, Ali. Thank you for the like and the subscribe, man. It helps the channel. Thank you very much.
I mean, to him, Mecca and Sana'a are more significant than Najaf and Qum and Tehran. That's a quite important dynamic to remember. And because, again, there is a huge domestic aspect in the past that covered them, which was the support for the Palestinian case. That does not exist at the moment in Yemen. And I think they are, again, it's always to remember.
Hey, Bless, why are you here?
Trump attacks, and it's not
Look in the mirror.
What a huge addition they will
You don't
make
have to be
should
here.
they join now compared to
This is my job.
Continue keeping their cards, play a poker face, keep everyone in their toes, and then they
You're
will
here
make
for
a
fun.
judgment by the end. But even then,
Or to get aggravated
it will
by
be
liberals.
a Houthi judgment that actually serves more the Houthis than actually serves Iran. I think this is a group that also.
And thanks
of
for
course,
helping
always
my
plays
channel
for
and the
war,
algorithm.
but it's
I
very
appreciate it.
calculative about how it enters and where, even if it's an extremely jihadist, irrational group, it does have built quite a different understanding of power and of greed and money the last few years. That also makes it think twice before making any other decision.
Khaled, back in August last year, Israel attacked.
I'm a little Irish.
Killing ministers of the Houthis' governing body. Clearly, we've seen, not just in this war, but in the last couple of years, the
No, we
Israeli
do not.
tactic of decapitation, war by assassination taking place in Iran, in Lebanon, in Gaza. I mean, I assume Houthi leaders themselves are worried about their own personal safety if they went to war.
I expect so, but of course, Israel does not have the same intelligence they do in Lebanon or in Iran. And they don't have the same access to where they are, I mean, the whereabouts of the Houthi leaders, like they do in the other places. Still, they could, I mean, and they did before. And this has to be a factor in their calculation, I mean, the Houthis.
Rockford, in terms of the global economy, we're mentioning, obviously, energy supplies and the fact that this Yanbu port and the pipeline from Saudi Arabia means Saudi Arabia can use this as a way to get stuff out. But, I mean, the difference between
Little
the Strait
Irish,
of Hormuz
little
and
Italian,
the Red
mostly
Sea
a mutt.
is
Just
that
a mutt.
the Strait of Hormuz is one way in, one way out. The Red Sea is such an important conduit for so much shipping, is it not?
That's right. It's one of the most important, if not the most important route to connect the Asian markets to the European markets, in addition to also being important for oil flows now both ways, because the pipeline across Saudi Arabia is being so used. And I would say one point I wanted to make is that we have seen the beginning of an international coalition with European nations as well as Japan and South Korea, even Canada, agreeing to play some role in that, as well as regional partners. And I think that it's important to remember that just right outside the Bab el-Mandeb in Djibouti, there are 4 bases there. There's a US base, a French base, a Chinese base, and a Japanese base. So that coalition, if it does form, which I think is likely, to help secure the commercial shipping going through the Strait of Hormuz, it could also help secure the shipping going through the Bab el-Mandeb.
Faria, I've seen some suggestions that Iran doesn't actually want the Houthis to get involved now. It wants to keep them in reserve, a last resort. I've even seen the suggestion that there may be some in the Revolutionary Guards who'd like to keep it as a potential refuge if they had to flee. Do you make anything of that?
Good comment, John.
I mean, there's a lot of nuts people throughout history who've found or flirted with the idea to find Yemen as a refuge, from Osama bin Laden to IRGC to former Ba'athists to former Hezbollah to former Hamas. I would not be surprised with that thinking, keeping in mind Yemen's geography. But Yemen is far, and Yemen is also unwelcoming of the Iranians overall. And the demographics that support IRGC, even within the Houthis, is extremely limited group. I have no doubt that the Iranians hope and pray that they can use the Houthis as much as they can, and they will always try that as much as they can. But I think at the moment it is less of a capability to do that also, because again, they are...
You are correct, Francisco.
October 7th,
all
Iran
this man does is lie.
That's
all he does. And he's stupid.
Who were with the Houthis, and
his followers are stupid.
And I think rather the game right now is not just from IRGC, but also from the Houthis themselves.
Trump should fuck off.
Growing,
all the way to hell.
Ambition are looking for the right moment to even replace Iran in the longer term, after they feel they have replaced Hezbollah in the region as a new leader of the axis of resistance. Whether that's factually correct or possible or objectively something one can imagine is a different story. But the Houthis are in that set of mind in which they believe, in fact, that they can at one point take a huge leadership position within the axis of resistance, all the way from Lebanon to Iraq to Iran. And I think that's quite a possibility in the long term, even though they do not have the necessary political and military capabilities to inherit what they think they actually can inherit and manage.
Thank you, Faria. Thank you to our guests today, Faria Al-Muslimi, Khaled Batafi, and Rockford Weiss. Context and analysis on this and many other aspects of the war can be found on our website, aljazeera.com. We'd like to hear your thoughts and comments too. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can find us on X. Look for @AJ Inside Story. For now, from me, James Bays, and the Inside Story team, that's it. Stand by. Al Jazeera's coverage of the war continues in just a few moments.
Welcome everyone to the live stream. Thank you for joining tonight. Take the poll, like and subscribe. It helps the channel. Trying to get to 1,000 subs, and stick around. I'm going to be here for at least another hour, probably 2. Thanks.
Killed in an Israeli strike that targeted southern Lebanon.
Continuing to hear the sound of sirens, according to Israeli media, one drone has infiltrated the borders.
There is a move in Congress to basically tie Donald Trump's hands and end the conflict. They say that's not America first, that's Israel first.
There is so much concern about what all this is going to do to energy markets, oil prices, gas prices, not just in the region, but around the world.
Stay with Al Jazeera for the latest developments.
In today's agricultural market, when fertilizer is available and how much it costs is beyond a farmer's control. So Lachlan Mac Smith is stockpiling everything he can.
I've been here 73 years. I've never seen
fuel price and fertilisers go up so quickly at such a critical time.
The Middle East is a major supplier of urea, the main chemical widely used as a fertiliser, and Australia imports most of its supplies. Shipping delays in the Strait of Hormuz have led to price increases. Farmers here tell us it's already spiked by 20%. Higher fuel prices are compounding the situation, with each livestock feed delivery more expensive than the last. Farmers here are often described as the backbone of the Australian economy, and so the pressures felt here could ripple through the supply chain, with warnings the entire food industry could be at risk.
Hello, it's OOGMT, and this is Al Jazeera with our continuing coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. I'm Darren Jordan. Iran strikes southern Israel, injuring dozens. The Israeli Prime Minister calls it a difficult evening of battle. Whoa. Iranian missiles target the city that's home to Israel's nuclear program. More than 50 people are injured in Dimona. Tehran says the attacks in response to US-Israeli strikes across Iran, a southern city and a major nuclear enrichment site, have also been hit.
We not only took out the facility, but also destroyed intelligence support sites and missile radar relays that were used to monitor ship movements.
And a senior US naval commander says Iran's ability to attack ships in the Strait of Hormuz has been degraded. Airstrikes on cities in southern Israel have destroyed residential buildings and left dozens of people injured. Whoa. An Iranian attack on the southern Israeli city of Dimona has injured more than 50 people. No damage has been reported to the nuclear facility nearby. That strike came after Iran reported an attack on its Natanz nuclear site, the largest in the country. The southern Israeli city of Arad has also come under rocket fire. Buildings are heavily damaged. At least 64 people have been injured. Rescue crews are searching for people under the rubble. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has posted a statement about the attacks. He described Saturday as a very difficult evening in the battle for our future. He also said he was offering prayers for the recovery of the wounded.
Thoughts and prayers. That's all they have. Thoughts and prayers.
Because Israel has banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside the country. He has this report on the attack on Dimona.
This was a very significant attack on what is a very strategically important city. Dimona is pretty much the home of Israel's nuclear program in the Negev desert down in the south of the country.
You are correct,
It does
Amiro.
appear that from this salvo, one ballistic missile got through defenses and there was a direct strike. But we also understand that there were several other impacts reported around the city. The number of casualties has been put now at over 50, most of those requiring hospital treatment, with one 12-year-old boy said to be in a very serious condition with shrapnel injuries.
Right, John? Trump keeps saying they're destroyed and obliterated and their military is finished. And yet they're still launching missiles, still launching drones, still fighting.
But Israel has accepted responsibility for other attacks. For example, recently an attack on what they say was a nuclear weapons research center at a university in Tehran. And Dimona has been the subject of attacks throughout Saturday. There have been a total of 7 air raid alerts being raised in the city as missiles were trying to get through. I think during this one of the last salvos on Saturday evening, this is when these missiles and debris managed to get through the defensive screen. And given the importance, the strategic importance of this city, and also the fact that Israel prides itself on intercepting a high ratio of incoming missiles, there is going to be an investigation into how this missile could get through.
Well, let's now hand over to Alan Fisher, who is live for us in Washington, D.C. Alan, we have a new Truth Social from President Trump. What can you tell us?
That's right. The US president has been posting just in the last 15 minutes.
Here we go.
And it feels like a significant escalation. He has said that if the United States of America will let me start that again. What he said is that if Iran doesn't open without threat the Strait of Hormuz within the next 48 hours from this point, and remember he posted this about 15 minutes ago, then the United States will start to target all their power plants, starting with the biggest first. So for a man who was talking about the possibility of the war coming to an end very soon, this seems to be quite a significant escalation. Joining us live now,
he has no idea what
in
he's doing.
Washington
He doesn't know what he's
Manny
talking about.
Rapallo. Manny,
This
the
is a
president has
disaster.
been talking about how he's ahead of schedule, he's doing
A disaster
well.
that has
This
cost
feels like
tens
a
of
change
billions,
tone
if
from
not
Donald
hundreds of
Trump in the
billions of
last 15
dollars,
minutes.
and has gotten
Absolutely,
American kids
Alan.
killed
Over
for
the course of the
no
day, we've
reason.
been reporting how there's been this gap between what the White House appears to want in the Strait of Hormuz and what the U.S. military says that they're already accomplishing. Now, President Trump has been very clear about, for example, his attempts to galvanize this international coalition of countries from NATO countries to other countries like South Korea and China to do more militarily to secure the flow of energy and oil through the Strait of Hormuz. But we also heard today from Central Command Commander Admiral Cooper, who says that the United States has been carrying out major airstrikes along the Iranian coast using heavy bunker-busting bombs to target underground missile facilities, targeting radar systems, etc. So we have this sense, a lot of clarity from the U.S. military in terms of them degrading. That's the word that's been used throughout the course of the day on Saturday.
You got it, John.
Iran's ability to threaten shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. So it is interesting at this point, to say the least, to hear from President Trump talking about this major escalation, given the fact that we've been hearing throughout the course of the day how much damage the United States has done supposedly to Iran's ability to target oil tankers and vessels traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. But what we're seeing here, in general terms, are two separate objectives. Politically, the White House continues to push allies to do more to secure the Strait of Hormuz. Militarily, up until now, Alan, the president has been giving the impression that this war, if anything, is winding down, that objectives are being met, giving the American people, at least, the idea that this war could soon be coming to an end.
But Manny, the president has said on many occasions, and he's backed up by members of his own administration,
This isn't coming to an end
this isn't
anytime
a war
soon.
on the Iranian people. If you start hitting power plants, it feels very much at that point that this is targeting the ordinary Iranian people.
This is certainly a major escalation. This is certainly something that, given what we've heard over the course of the last few days of the war potentially winding down, that's what President Trump had said on Friday, a very different scenario than many people were anticipating, which like you said, the targeting of energy systems, the targeting of anything that isn't essentially a military target certainly represents a major escalation in this conflict. Now, we should note here that within this sort of contradictory message that we hear from the White House, because on one hand we hear President Trump saying that the war is winding down, but then at the same time you hear Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, saying that the Pentagon needs $200 billion for war funding. You hear the President of the United States saying that there's going to be thousands of troops deployed. So how can these things coexist at the same time?
They shouldn't get another
$200
billion for this
here,
nonsense.
President Trump
This is
is
insane.
signaling that objectives are being met in Iran. But up until this moment, the idea here was President Trump saying that essentially this war has already been won, at least militarily. That's the message that's been directed at the American people over the course of the last week from President Trump. The Americans who are growing day by day more concerned over how long this war is going to last, over how much this war is going to cost. We know that troops are being deployed by the thousands.
How much it's going to cost us at the gas pump and at the stores?
So at this point, there is a sense that it's less contradiction and more strategic messaging by the President of the United States, but he may be losing control of that narrative at this point. Alan?
He's losing
Just to
control of
recap,
his
we've heard
mind.
from Donald Trump in
He's
the last 15,
nuts.
20 minutes that he's threatened Iran, saying that if they don't reopen the Straits of Hormuz within 48 hours with no conditions, then he will start to target some of their power plants, starting with the biggest ones first, threatening effectively to obliterate them. Well, in a moment, we'll bring in our guest, Sina Azzouri, who's the Director of Middle East Studies at George Washington University. But first, let's remind you about what President Donald Trump had to say about this war just a little earlier on Saturday.
Welcome, Oscar.
We've knocked out their Navy, their Air Force. We've knocked out their anti-aircraft. We've knocked out everything. We're roaming free. From a military standpoint, all they're doing is clogging up the strait. But from a military standpoint, they're finished.
I'm joined by Sina Azzouri, as I said. He's the Director of Middle East Studies, a program at George Washington University here
We're
in
being led
Washington.
by
Sina,
a moron.
This seems like a different tone coming from the White House.
Yes, and I think this is the classic President Trump, that he gets angry, he starts tweeting or posting on Truth Social. Unfortunately, with this president, we don't know. Meaning that, yesterday he claimed that the U.S. has already won, and then you have unsanctioning of Iranian oil by the U.S. government, which is the first time since 1996, and now he's saying that, oh, if Iran does not do this, doesn't open the Strait of Hormuz, there's going to be more coming. Not all of these statements can be true at the same time. Either you have won the war, or you're seeing that your war is not going according to the plan.
But he's got the firepower to do this, and he's got the aerial superiority over Iran to do this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He can go after the power plants. I think Iranian air defenses have been largely degraded. But then there's a question of, in the game of chess, the other side will also get a turn. How will Iranians respond to this? The answer is, I don't know how they will respond, but they will clearly will try not to back down. They will try to respond, and the question is, who will be the next target?
This reflects an air of frustration from Donald Trump, doesn't it? Because he doesn't seem to have planned, on the face of it, to keep the Straits of Hormuz open, even though we were told they had covered this plan. And now he's trying to strong-arm Iran into doing what he wants to do.
Well, absolutely. I mean, when General Kane had warned him that the Iranians could shut down the Strait of Hormuz, he had dismissed it. He had said that Iranians will capitulate much sooner than that. But that didn't happen. That didn't happen. 21st days, 21 days to the war. We are where we are now. Iranians have not capitulated. They've escalated. And
Hitler tried to control things on the battlefield too.
Now they're
and went against what his generals told him. Didn't work out too well for him. He ended up in a ditch on fire. So, we could hope for the same for Trump.
So, again, the nature of war is it never goes according to the plan.
And the nature of the Iranians, how are they likely to respond? I mean, you know them as well as anyone. How are they likely to respond to this sort of threat?
Well, I'll tell you this, that they surprise me
probably try
too.
to sink ships.
Sometimes I think they will not respond, they will respond. But I think they're at the point where they think that they're fighting for their survival. And backing down
for their survival.
At this juncture would look really bad on them. So if I have to put my eggs in a basket, I would say they will not back down. They're going to get hit, and they're going to respond by attacking regional countries.
What sort of difference would targeting the power plants make in Iran at the moment, which has been in a state of war for the last 21 days?
Well, for now, the Iranian government has been able to maintain electricity. I have not heard of any major blackouts. But if this happens, it will directly affect the Iranians who don't have the memory of the Iran-Iraq war, where they had to experience major blackouts. This is a reminder of those era for them.
Is it likely to fuel
Trump doesn't care about the Iranian people,
the Iranian government,
or the Cuban people, or anyone not named Trump?
If America really means
it. Get it now?
This is not a war against the Iranian people.
I think that the Iranian people have already been witnessing how their lives have changed. Ordinary Iranians, they've lost their businesses, and we just passed the Persian New Year. Many people lost their businesses, lost their homes, they've been displaced. So it's clearly a war on them and no longer on the government. The so-called precision strikes are no longer there. But I don't expect them to rise up It will fuel anger and, of course, dissatisfaction. But in times of war, people tend to shelter, and they do not go to the streets to protest. I think they will absorb the punishment.
I know you're not a military strategist, but it seems odd that you would give the Iranians 48 hours of intent to bomb something like the power plant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a significant part of everyone's life. Everything they do is kind of tied to the power supply.
Because Trump's insane.
Well, yes, but I think that if the president decides to do so, he can. As you said, I think they have the Americans have the firepower, unquestionable air superiority over Iranian airspace. But my concern is what Iranians will do after they've been hit by the Americans. They've clearly have shown no restraint in targeting regional countries, facilities. If they believe that their power plants are being targeted, they might start attacking regional countries' power plants to make the case that if you hit us, there's going to be an eye for an eye response.
As you've pointed out, earlier Donald Trump said that effectively the war was won. They'd achieved all their military goals.
Yeah,
now he's introduced another goal. Is this symptomatic of the way that the Americans appear, and I only say appear because we're not behind the doors, but appear to have approached this war in that they're making it up as they go along, like you mentioned?
Of course they're making it up as they go along.
Lifting the sanctions on Iranian oil since 1976.
Trump is making it up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, clearly, my perception is that the administration was sold the narrative that it's going to be, a walk in the park, it's going to be easy. The president thought that the Iranians will capitulate very quickly. But I think the president, at least the president himself, I think dismissed his advisors, his military advisors' caution that Iranians will respond, because these military men understand war better than everybody else. They understand it much better than Donald Trump. So I'm sure they've warned him, but they've been dismissed. And unfortunately, with this administration, with the administration of Donald Trump, the experts or their expertise, the expertise of the people are not that valued. They've been pushed to the side, and I'm sure the military officers, they were concerned with their own jobs rather than trying to tell Donald Trump the truth. That's what I think will happen. This is why you're seeing that war hasn't gone according to the plan, and the American people are not supporting it.
We heard the FBI had effectively dismissed some of their Iranian experts before the war started.
Mm-hmm.
How does that impact everything that you do if the people that you could in the past go to and say, hey, if this happens, what then is the response from Iranians? It seems that's been a very short-sighted move on behalf of this administration.
I think so, and I think it's because of Donald Trump's personality that he dismisses expertise. He prefers loyalty over expertise. The first administration that it was
reminds me of
in
Hitler and Stalin.
From 2017 to 2021, he had people who told him the truth. Yes, there were Republicans. Yes, they supported Donald Trump. But we saw that ultimately all these generals, all these people who were in the administration tried to restrain him. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs tried to restrain him. But I think in this administration, loyalty has been given the priority over the expertise and telling the president the truth.
Donald Trump, of course, often says that he's doing this because no other U.S. president would have done it. Was
He's
there a
doing
reason
it
why no other
because
US
of the
president
Epstein
would have done it?
files.
Yes, because they were smarter in foreign policy. Look, the Iraq War was a mistake, but at least President George W. Bush was able to sell the war to the American people in the aftermath of 9/11. Obama came in far more cautious than George W. Bush, understood you cannot overextend American power all the time. Biden, I think the same. But I think that this president, despite some of the inclinations that he has had, you can call it isolationist incentives, or instincts. I think that he ended up being in the trap of trying to do regime change abroad.
Yep,
Keep in
definitely
mind that the
dumber,
United
John.
States,
Definitely dumber.
since the end of Cold War, has started 7 wars.
Sina Azodi, for the time being, thanks very much indeed. Let's go to Manny Rapallo, who joins us live now. Manny, bring us up to speed on some of the other perspectives that we're seeing in the U.S. Capitol.
Alan, over the course of the day, there's been a lot of chatter here in D.C., perhaps optimistic chatter in D.C. over the possibility of a diplomatic off-ramp coming out of this conflict, the potential. There was a lot of talk about the leverage that Iran had initially in this conflict. This idea that the more that the United States hit Iran militarily, that Iran would dig in deeper to sort of go for the long haul, a war of survival, a war of attrition, where really sort of wear down Iran's foes, the United States and Israel, for both politically and economically, and in doing so, create a massive shock to the global energy supply and sparking a global crisis here. So over the course of the day, a lot has been examined over what it would take to see a serious off-ramp. We were talking about President Trump on Friday saying that he wanted this war to wind down. He's talking about a lot of that contradictory language, considering that right now the U.S. says that objectives are being met, but every time that the United States hits one of those new objectives, every time that the United States says that they have quote-unquote degraded Iran's military capabilities, Iran is hitting back with retaliatory strikes. And what Iran is showing right now is that they still are capable of expanding the scope of this conflict. And Washington is forced to sort of come to grips with that. So the sort of position that the Trump administration is in right now is a difficult one, because they are still having to sell to the American people that this was going to be a short and easy and decisive operation. But what is playing out in real life is something very, very different. Alan?
And let's not forget that the Pentagon is asking Congress for an additional $200 billion
Yeah, they
to
get fuck
fight
off.
the war. Manny, thanks very much indeed. We have another guest joining us here on set in Washington, D.C. Paulo von Schirach is president of the Global Policy Institute. Paulo, we've heard this new Truth Social post from Donald Trump. He says that if they don't open the Strait of Hormuz in the next 48 hours, he's going to obliterate their power plants. This feels like a significant escalation from Donald Trump.
Well, we've heard so many different things. We're winding down. Strait of Hormuz is not our problem. Let somebody else deal with it. We're going to obliterate everything. We have obliterated things already several times, by my count. So I don't know what to make of this, quite frankly. And let's also consider what's on the ground and what's forthcoming. We know there is this Marine Expeditionary Force coming, 1, 2, whatever. But let's look at this in perspective. At the time of the first Gulf War, there were 500,000 Americans in Saudi Arabia ready to jump on the Iraqis in Kuwait. And the invasion of Iraq in 2003 between the Americans and the British was 300,000 in a country which is 1/4 more or less the size of Iran. I am not trying to diminish the firepower of a Marine Expeditionary Force. It's a pretty big affair. But I don't know that that's enough to get hold of the Strait of Hormuz or to do whatever the president is trying to do. If he says he's going to bomb other targets, I thought we run out of targets. We've obliterated everything many times over. And I'm not trying to make light of this. This is serious business. But I have no idea what he means, to be honest with you.
Does this feel like targeting the Iranian people, which he said on several occasions? This is not a war against the ordinary Iranians. This is against the regime.
Absolutely. And again, you remember, he said at some point, we are targeting the regime, so the people stay at home, stay tight. Then when everything is done, you can get out in the streets and take over your government. He
Ridiculous.
Said that. At another point, he said the only thing that I would consider
Cutting all the
regarding
social
Iran
programs
is unconditional
to fund a
surrender,
war,
which is Japan
and give tax cuts to
1945
billionaires.
and Germany 1945. So, which sounds a bit unrealistic because that would mean the complete destruction and surrender of the entire regime, no resistance, nobody there. And again, that proposition has been, I don't know if it's been forgotten, but at least has not been brought up again. So I'm not quite sure what is meant, because the targets and the modalities to achieve them seem to change. I'm not saying that the president is unable to do many things. Of course he can. Yeah. And he can deploy forces and add to whatever is already on the ground, which is pretty significant. But I'm not sure what the game plan is.
Sina Azodi, the Iranians have been preparing this for 40 years because they were always concerned something like this might happen. How well entrenched are they in their positions that would come under threat from Donald Trump's massive obliteration war?
Well, they've been preparing this for a while, especially after 9/11, the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. They learned that they cannot fight the United States as far more superior firepower directly. This is why you're seeing the Iranian Navy is mostly consisted of small boats that they can attack, mines, anti-ship cruise missiles. They've dispersed their ballistic missile program across the country, under the mountain. And this is why, and I absolutely agree with what you're saying, the U.S. has targeted so many places, but Iranians are still fighting back. That unconditional surrender that the president demanded hasn't come yet, and I don't believe that the Iranians will ever sign an instrument of unconditional surrender.
Paolo, best guess, do the Iranians agree and reopen the Strait of Hormuz with no conditions?
Of course they're not going to surrender.
48 hours
they're going to fight to the bitter end.
I doubt it.
They don't have a choice.
With no conditions. They already said, we want payment of war reparations. That's one thing that, again, where that's going to go, I have no idea. But they realize they have leverage. And the question is, if America, doing whatever it will do, can reopen and keep open the Strait of Hormuz, and again, let's keep this in mind. Sure, America they don't need to hit everything. As long as they hit one or two tankers here and there, well, that's enough damage to discourage the ship owners, let alone Lloyd's in London, to say, oh, we're going to insure this cargo, no problem, because the Americans have cleared everything.
That was a problem, wasn't it? Because the strait was opened at the start of the war.
Yes.
But no one would insure. The Americans said, we'll back them, but still, no one wanted to take the risk.
That's right. And then there's been this complicated dance, as we've seen, with Trump saying, we don't need anybody, then yes, we need somebody.
All they have to do is hold out, Billy. All they have to do is hold out.
We've seen how that went, not very well, and with a lot of recriminations,
Hello,
which probably will have ripple effects in European-American relations. I mean, but that's a different story, not that we need to worry about this right now. Again, the proposition of keeping Hormuz open, and even, let's say, you land a force on the Strait of Hormuz. The Marines are going to do that, okay? But as far as I know, the Iranians have long-range drones that could strike from inland, which really means if you take over the coastal area alone, it's not going to do it. Because if drones can come in and cannot be intercepted, all of them, from 200 kilometers away, well, then you have to take that land too, and make sure that the Strait of Hormuz is not within the range, the striking range of any and all Iranian weapons, whatever they've got left, which we know they've been battered badly, but they still have quite a bit, as he was saying a moment ago.
One more thing,
yes,
if there is force on Iranian territory, it's going to cause a lot of issues. I mean, 5,000 Marines, I'm sure it's a skilled force. But then you have to face an Iranian ground forces. You're also operating on a hostile territory with a country that has a strong sense of itself as a state. It's extremely nationalistic. and then you have foreign troops on your homeland. This is going to change things for Iranians.
They're not going to be greeted as liberators, are they?
May I also add that one of the issues which are really, really, how can I say, difficult in the United States is to accept casualties. So far, the casualty has been minimal. 10, 15, 15 people have died. If you have a ground invasion and there's attrition, obviously, fighting with Iranian defenders, and they're going to send the Islamic Guard, well, then there will be more casualties, for sure. And that looks terrible on American media. If we have now a situation in which we want to have war with no casualties, which is not exactly an easy proposition for anybody.
Hala Senat, thank you very much indeed for joining us live here in Washington. That's it from the team here in Washington, D.C. for now. We'll now hand you back to our global headquarters in Doha.
Thank you all for coming to the live stream. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Love you all. Thank you.
Tehran says the strike was in retaliation for Israel's attack on its Natanz nuclear facility. There's been an attack on Iran's Natanz nuclear enrichment facility. The site was hit during last year's 12-day war, after which Donald Trump claimed Iran's nuclear capabilities had been obliterated. There's been no leak of radioactive material from the site. The UN's nuclear agency is calling for military restraint. President Trump says the US will, quote, obliterate Iran's power plants if it doesn't open the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours. Trump issued the threat on Saturday evening. A fifth of the world's oil and gas transits through the strait. Iran has effectively blockaded it since the start of the war. Well, more now on that strike in Natanz. Earlier, my colleague Sarah Khairat spoke with William Albert. He's a senior adjunct fellow at the Pacific Forum and the former director of NATO's Arms Control, Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Center. He says the attack on the Natanz nuclear facility will likely not have a lasting impact.
I think this is the logical outcome of the U.S. attacks. And when we're trying to think about how Donald Trump would declare victory, I think he can't declare victory until he solves something regarding the very large amount, 440.9 kilograms of 60% enriched, highly enriched uranium that has so far been unaccounted for since the bombings back in June. So that's why I think we see this new bombing at Natanz to try to resolve the issue and to claim that we've neutralized this reservoir of material from which Iran could derive a nuclear weapon.
And for people like myself and others in the region, when I heard the news, especially about Natanz, this is the second time because it was attacked in the war last year. I mean, here in Qatar, we're just across the water from Iran. We're not that far away. The first thing that comes to mind is, are we safe?
If we're talking about bombing the facilities where they enriched uranium, or a facility, we suspect there's another facility near Natanz that Iran might be storing the enriched uranium, you are completely safe. Because if this material is hit, if the containers, you're talking about a uranium hexafluoride gas in basically a metal tube like you would keep carbon dioxide or propane. If it's punctured, the uranium gas can escape, and it's very dangerous if you're in the room with it. But a kilometer away, you would have no idea this happened. There's no radiological release possible really outside a number of meters. This really is not an environmental hazard, except if you're in the room. If you're nearby and you breathe in this gas, sure, it's dangerous.
Interesting.
But we're not talking about fission. We're not talking about Chernobyl. We're not talking about attacking a working reactor. We're talking about a nuclear fuel that is in gaseous form, that is not combustible. It's not going to poison the atmosphere or damage people way off-site, as in, across the Gulf.
Israeli troops are simultaneously expanding their ground offensive in southern Lebanon. Airstrikes targeted several houses and commercial shops in the district of Tyre. More than 1,000 people have been killed across Lebanon. Well, 20% of the world's daily oil supply usually passes through the Strait of Hormuz. The US is calling on its allies, including NATO, to help secure shipping through the crucial waterway. Jalid Ege explains why achieving that goal is so difficult.
Securing the Strait of Hormuz is no easy task. Firstly, it's narrow, located between Oman and Iran. It's only about 39 kilometers at its widest point. Secondly, the waters are shallow, confining supertankers to two tight shipping lanes, one for going in and the other for going out. The limited space means that if they're attacked, these huge ships have very little room to maneuver. Iran controls the islands nearby. That includes Keshm, Abu Musa, the Greater and Lesser Tums, and Larak, which it can use as military outposts to launch drones and missiles. But Iran has another advantage. Its southern coastline is mountainous. This provides camouflage for fortified bunkers deep underground, but also for missile launchers. Iran has plenty of military options at its disposal. That includes fast attack craft, submarines, and mines.
It's a
US
giant
forces have
kill
been targeting
box.
its naval assets, but Iran says it retains significant
Trump
capabilities.
locked us into a
So
trap.
what would it take to end its grip on the Strait of Hormuz? Well, naval vessels would need to escort commercial tankers, and that's to help provide protection against any attacks. The waterway would also have to be cleared of any mines, and perhaps most significantly, the entire operation would require international cooperation.
Saudi Arabia has given an Iranian military attaché and 4 other diplomats 24 hours to leave the country as Iran keeps up attacks on its Gulf neighbors. A series of drone and missile strikes have targeted Saudi Arabia. Air defenses in Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates have also carried out several interceptions. Raisal Sardar is following developments from Riyadh.
We have seen another statement from the Minister of Defense saying that 4 more Iranian drones have been intercepted by Saudi air defenses. So far, in the last 24 hours, there have been nearly 60 drones that were fired from Iran towards Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi authorities here are saying that all of them have been intercepted. Indeed, just a couple of hours ago, I was talking to a Saudi retired general in the armed forces of the country, and he was expressing the confidence in the country's capability of defending the nation here. And he was saying that the country has one of the most sophisticated and, of course, strongest air forces in the region. But having said that, the majority of drones so far have been particularly aimed at the eastern province of the country is important because the overwhelming majority of the country's energy facilities and resources are located in the eastern province, including the export terminals and the processing plants. But Saudi Arabia, compared to the other Gulf countries, has an advantage, and that it has an alternative. Through the Red Sea also it can transfer or transport its energy. So 30% of Saudi energy, indeed, it is being transported to the world through the Red Sea. But Iranian drones or missiles are not only targeting the eastern province, but just in recent days we have seen that escalating attacks on the city of Yanbu, which is a coastal city and is hosting important energy facilities of Saudi Arabia. So here, this is definitely putting a huge pressure on the Saudi economy because the energy is the economic lifeline of the country. And of course, while all of that is happening, so the rift between Riyadh and Tehran is also further growing.
Well, Iran has responded to President Trump. He said following previous warnings, if Iran's fuel and energy infrastructure is attacked by the enemy, all energy infrastructure, information technology and desalination facilities belonging to the US and the regime in the region will be targeted. So Iran has responded that. Now, Iran has denied targeting a joint British-US military base in the Indian Ocean. The UK's Ministry of Defence says the attack on Diego Garcia Island, which is more than 5,000 kilometres from Tehran, was unsuccessful. British Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper said the UK would continue to provide defensive support against what she's called reckless Iranian threats. Despite Tehran's denial, Israel says the attack highlights Iran's ability to strike well beyond the Middle East.
Iran launched a 2-stage intercontinental ballistic missile with a range of 4,000 kilometers at an American target on the island of Diego Garcia. These missiles are not intended to strike Israel. Their range reaches European capitals. Berlin, Paris, and Rome are all within direct threat range.
Well, following the attack on Diego Garcia, the UK Prime Minister has told Cyprus the US will not be allowed to use the British airbase on the island to attack Iran. The RAF Akrotiri base was hit by an Iranian drone early in the conflict. In a phone call with the Cypriot president, Keir Starmer said the facility would not be part of its agreement with the United States to use British bases for defensive strikes on Iranian missile sites. Sona Gallego has more now from London.
The phone conversation on Saturday between the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the Cypriot President Nikos Christodoulides was all about trying to ease the political tensions that have erupted since the start of this war. Primarily, it is about the security situation in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Cyprus as well. Of course, Cyprus being targeted by what UK authorities said was Hezbollah drones from Lebanon as well. That caused an enormous amount of consternation for the Cypriot leadership as well. And only 2 days ago, the president himself, the Cypriot president, said that after this particular war, that perhaps it was time for Cyprus to reconsider the presence of those UK bases on the island as well. That, of course, has set alarm bells off in the UK as well, because Cyprus is also a strategic part for the UK as well. It is enormously important. It has carried out missions from Akrotiri to Syria and to Iraq as well. So while tensions are attempting to be allayed by this phone conversation as well, there is also still the determination to try and resolve these hostilities via diplomatic means as well, with the Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying that they would only act on a defensive measure and that the only way to resolve this crisis would be through diplomatic means. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera, London.
Now, Israel's been assassinating leading Iranian military, security and political figures as part of its stated war aims. But the policy of Israeli targeted killings dates back decades. Its forces have carried out covert and public operations all around the world. Noura Day has more from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank.
Cries for revenge grow louder in Iran. Hundreds of thousands mourn high-ranking figures killed in Israeli strikes just weeks after the assassination of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Israel promises they won't be the last. They were also not the first. Israel has used political
Israel's a bunch of murderers.
Since
Fuck,
its
baby.
inception, starting with
Piece of
Swedish
shit.
diplomat Folk Bernadotte, killed by a Zionist armed group known as the Stern Gang in 1948.
Maybe he's also the president of the United
Over the
States, in
decades,
case you
Israel
didn't
has
know.
carried out thousands of covert and public assassinations around the world. The Mossad, its spy agency, stood behind many of those operations, which included abductions, hit squads, bombings, and even poison. In the 1960s, the Mossad unleashed Operation Damocles, targeting German scientists working with Egypt, led by Jamal Abdel Nasser, to develop its missile capabilities. In the 70s and 80s, Israel assassinated dozens of Palestinians, intellectuals, including author Ghassan Kanafani, and diplomats such as Mahmoud al-Hamshari, as well as other prominent figures like Khalil al-Wazir. The targeted killings accelerated after the year 2000, claiming the lives of many well-known activists and high-profile political figures in the occupied West Bank and Gaza. Among them, PLO leader Abu Ali Mustafa in 2001, and Hamas founder Sheikh Ahmed Yassin in 2004. Palestinians have long maintained that Israel was behind the mysterious illness and subsequent death of President Yasser Arafat. Israel is also accused of assassinating dozens of Iraqi and Iranian scientists over the years. By 2023, state-sponsored killings had reached industrial scale. Hundreds of Palestinian journalists, artists, academics, and doctors were targeted, often with their families. During the war on Gaza, Israel assassinated senior Hamas leaders in Gaza, Beirut, and Tehran. It also killed Hezbollah's longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah, and just days later, his favored successor, along with other senior officials. Now Israel has removed political approvals needed for assassinations, authorizing the army to target any Iranian or Hezbollah leader when the
I agree,
opportunity
Duncan.
arises.
I agree.
But questions remain, though,
They're
as to
always
whether
2
all
weeks
these
away.
killings will make
2
Israel
weeks.
safe as its leaders claim.
It's
History
insane.
suggests otherwise. Noura Day, Al Jazeera, Ramallah, Palestine.
The US-Israeli attacks are taking their toll on ordinary Iranians. For one family, they've been searching for their brother a week after an airstrike reduced his supermarket to rubble in the capital, Tehran. Kelly Callahan reports.
Buried somewhere under the rubble of this building in Tehran is Mahdi Mirza Hosseini, 5 days after the airstrike that caused this. His brothers are still searching for him.
We all hope he's found safe or hospitalized. We just pray he's only injured and in the hospital, because there's no trace of him here.
This block housed businesses including a bank and a supermarket. Mahdi had opened his shop in this location just 1 month ago.
My mother had tried to stop him, saying, "Don't go, the situation is bad." He said he had to go, the customers had called.
The Iranian capital has been relentlessly bombarded by US and Israeli forces since the war began last month. Civilian areas are also being hit.
My brother had a protein supermarket store here on the first floor. My brother's store was from here to the end of the wall. He went to the store
Yes,
during
they have,
the war,
Duncan.
and now he's
Got
missing.
suckered right in.
Despite the risk of daily
Bye,
airstrikes
baby.
targeting Tehran, these brothers are determined to find their sibling.
Because the Israelis own us,
Al Jazeera.
even though our tax
Hundreds
dollars
of people have
support
protested
them
in central
and
London
pay for
against
their
US and
existence.
Israeli strikes on Iran.
We still do their bidding.
Demonstrators called for an immediate end to the conflict and warned against further regional escalation, including in Lebanon and Palestine. Similar marches took place in other UK cities, including Manchester, Birmingham and Cardiff.
We've had 25 years of the so-called war on terror. This is the most dangerous point since the war in Iraq. We were told that was going to bring peace and democracy. It was an epic failure. This war, Epic Fury, is going to be an epic failure as well. And therefore, we can't keep on generation after generation having these wars. We have to stop. And that's what we're saying here today.
I like this lady.
In Spain, thousands of people rallied against the war in Iran. They were joined by members of pro-Palestinian organizations. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has refused to allow the US military to use Spanish bases for its attacks on Iran. Let's take a look at some other news now. It was Mother's Day across most of the Arab world and the Middle East on Saturday. It's usually a time of celebration, but in Palestine, it's a day of grief and hardship as mothers mourn children lost in the war and children face the day without their mothers. Ian Huddery reports from Gaza.
I wouldn't doubt it, Duncan.
In
I
most
wouldn't doubt it.
places, Mother's Day is filled with flowers, gifts, and celebration. But here in Gaza, it is marked by tears and grief. Mothers who lost their children during the war, killed in Israeli attacks, mark this day in mourning instead of celebration. Like Imrami, she still lost 3 of her sons. 2 of their bodies are still being withheld by Israeli authorities. She never said goodbye and still waits for the moment she can hold them one last time.
Very heartbreaking. Very.
I miss my sons on Mother's Day. They used to bring me gifts, flowers, sweets, and ask me about my needs.
We are really
They
good
were
at
the
creating
light of my
humanitarian
life. I
crisis.
keep looking at their photos and clothes.
Inside her tent, their photos rest beneath her pillow. She looks at them every day, as if holding on will keep their memory alive. She has not given away their clothes. They are the only last pieces she has left of her sons. Other mothers spend this day in graveyards, sitting beside their children's graves and the only place they feel close to them. And for many children, there is no Mother's Day at all. Their mothers were killed, leaving behind silence where love once lived. Maram Ahmed is 14 years old, the sole survivor of her family. She lost her mother, her closest friend, in an Israeli airstrike that killed her entire family. This year, Maram will not celebrate. She will watch other children with their mothers in silence.
On Mother's Day, even if I didn't have money, I would buy my mum a gift from my allowance, even if it was for less than $1. I just wanted to make her happy. This year, my
I hear
mum's
you,
not with
Duncan.
me.
I hear you.
This is the second Mother's Day without her. I feel so sad when I see other children with their mothers, but I don't show it.
This day carries unbearable loss for mothers who lost their children and for children who lost their mothers. On Mother's Day in Gaza, there's no celebrations, only loss. Mothers are grieving and children are left behind. Hind al-Khudari, Al Jazeera, Gaza, Palestine.
A Ukrainian delegation has been holding talks with US officials to end the war with Russia. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says his team has been speaking to US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Russian forces have continued targeting Ukrainian cities. A Russian drone strike has killed 2 people in the city of Zaporizhia. 2 children were also injured in the attack. Former FBI Director and Special Counsel Robert Mueller has died at the age of 81. He served under several administrations and was credited with major structural and cultural changes within the FBI. But he's best known for leading the high-profile federal investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Trump has posted on social media saying he's glad Mueller died. France is gearing up for the second round of closely watched municipal elections on Sunday. The vote is seen as an indicator of what could happen in next year's presidential election. And in a country that's increasingly polarized, new alliances are forming on the left and right of the political spectrum. Natasha Butler reports from Paris.
The party of French far-right leader Marine Le Pen has never won a major city in local elections, but now Marseille is within its grasp.
Historic is the only word for it. The wind of change and hope has swept through our city like never before.
National Rally candidate Frank Alicio is neck and neck with the incumbent socialist Mayor Benoît Payan, who's urging voters to back him.
I want to speak about how serious this moment is. The National Rally is on the threshold of power in the city. Never in Marseille has the National Rally been so close to victory.
The National Rally made strong gains in the first round, but the party could struggle in the runoff as some candidates have formed alliances hoping to block it. At the other end of the political spectrum, the hard left France Unbound party's already won the city of Saint-Denis, north of Paris, and is on track to take another major town, Roubaix.
We have to stay mobilized. Elections are never won in advance. We're in the lead, but we can't rest on our laurels.
While the far right and hard left have momentum, traditional parties are still expected to win most cities, including the capital. It'll be a tight race here in Paris between the 2 frontrunners, the conservative politician Rachida Dati and the socialist Emmanuel Grégoire. Both are hoping to take over from Anne Hidalgo, the socialist mayor of Paris, whose legacy will include overseeing the Olympic Games in the city and making it more bike-friendly.
Quite like a lot of what Anne Hidalgo has done with the the pedestrianisation here, reducing the level of cars, trying to clean up the air a little bit.
I want someone who cares not only about people in central Paris, but people from the suburbs too, who come here to work.
France has 35,000 mayoral seats. For political parties, these elections are
Yeah, Duncan, I agree. This isn't NATO's war. This is our war.
Presidential ballot, when voters will pick
all
a
Trump does is disrespect our allies.
Natasha Butler, Al
He's done
Jazeera,
incredible
Paris.
damage.
Now, Europe has been tightening its rules for asylum seekers by expanding the list of other countries that are safe for relocation. It's also making it easier to deport people who fail to qualify.
Good point.
Now, some
We weren't
countries are going
attacked.
as far
This
as
is a war of
revoking
choice from
asylum
Trump.
status. As John Soropoulos reports from Athens, it's not always clear why.
Elpida has just started school. She's proud of her Greek reading, and so are her parents, who are Turkish refugees. 7 years ago, they were granted asylum in Greece because in Turkey they had been imprisoned for editorials they wrote, but their status in Greece is now at risk. In January, Elpida's father, Ali, received an email from the Migration Ministry.
It said there was a secret document. Then it said I was a danger to national security and the process of revoking my asylum had begun. A month later, I got a letter saying my asylum was revoked at this date and time. It said you can go back to your country or find another country. But we have sent your file to the police and they can deport you.
The Greek Council for Refugees, which represents Ali, says Greece is revoking protection for a large number of Turkish refugees on obscure grounds.
You are not aware of what is the concern or the accusation in terms of national security that is extended to you by the Greek administration. You have no means to challenge it in any substantiated manner. So this creates a very significant concern in what regards access to effective remedies and to actual judicial protection.
Ali's is part of a broad sweep of revocations now underway in Greece.
The migration minister has asked for a review of all asylum cases. As a temporary status, it can be revoked, something that spiked since Thanos Blevris assumed office in July 2025. Last year alone, Greece revoked the asylum status of almost 200 people, compared to 400 in the previous decade. Dozens more cases are under review this year, and there appears to be a religious element to the policy.
Greece suspended asylum applications for mainly Muslim asylum seekers arriving from Libya for 3 months last summer. Most of the people whose asylum is being revoked are from majority Muslim countries. And at a recent parliamentary committee hearing, Blevris stated clearly that Greece doesn't prefer Muslim workers.
There are countries with which we don't have common values, and that's mainly because of religion. Let's be clear, it's because of hardcore Islam. So you have to pick countries that are religiously neutral.
European politicians are pushing back against the asylum policies of recent years that saw millions of refugees make their home here. In so doing, they are redefining what it means to be European. John Saropoulos, Al Jazeera, Athens.
Now, last year, the US suspended most of its foreign aid, affecting more than $12 billion in annual support to Africa. Instead of donor-driven aid, the US is now offering transactional agreements. Al Jazeera's Hara Matassa reports from Zimbabwe's capital, Harare.
It's visiting hour at Sally Mugabe Hospital, and people are going to see friends and relatives who are sick. Like many public health care facilities in Zimbabwe, there are shortages of TB drugs and essential medicines. The government has for decades struggled to fund its public health care sector. Rumbidzai Pondamari gets her antiretroviral drugs for free from humanitarian agencies. She worries global cuts to funding and aid could lead to shortages. When she heard her government had rejected a $367 million deal with the United States, she panicked.
Yeah, Duncan, we're already paying the price, man.
$15 to $20. I can't afford
Gas
that.
is insane.
If I stop taking
It's
these
over
HIV
$1
drugs,
more
I
now
will
than
die.
it was a few weeks ago.
Government officials in Harare say they refuse
Prices
the
are
so-called
rising in
health
the
compact
stores.
because Washington
This
demanded
country's a
access to
mess,
Zimbabwe's
a mess,
biological
and he's
samples
making it
for
worse.
research. Politicians say there is no guarantee Zimbabwe will have access to vaccines or treatments
Lovemore.
that might be developed from data collected from Africans and sent to the US.
Can't you see that we're going back to the slave trade days, where actually our able and strong men were supposed to go there and help the West in their economic development, because here maybe they were not needed according to them. Those types of racial undertones and slave trade type of attitudes is what we thought were being projected here.
These are some of the African countries in negotiations with the US for billions of dollars in new funding. In exchange, the US wants access to critical minerals and control over sensitive health data. Zimbabwe isn't the only nation with concerns, though. Kenya was the first to sign, but withdrew after a court raised concern about how citizens' personal information would be handled. Zambia halted talks because the deal was tied to sharing sensitive data and control of mining interests. The US says the funds will be released directly to African governments rather than to aid agencies, as was often the case in the past, over a 5-year period. They will support programs on HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and epidemic preparedness. It also says Americans must benefit from the exchange, but it's not clear how. Zimbabwe needs help to fund its HIV programs, but politicians say if that means handing over personal health data, then Washington can keep its money. Hara Matassa, Al Jazeera, Harare.
Washington wants the minerals. That's
Okay,
what they
we're going
want.
to take a very short break now. I'm Darren Jordan. Stay with us.
It's not hard to figure out. All right, guys, I'm going to do this stream for about 1 more hour, and then I'm going to call it a night. Thank you all for joining. I love you all very much. Thanks for showing up. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Helps the channel. And yeah, let's knock out 1 more hour, and then we can get on with our lives.
The cost on Al Jazeera.
In today's agricultural market, when fertiliser is available and how much it costs is beyond a farmer's control. So Lachlan Mac Smith is stockpiling everything he can.
I've been here 73 years. I've never seen fuel price and fertiliser go up so quickly at such a critical time.
The Middle East is a major supplier of urea, the main chemical widely used as a fertiliser, and Australia imports most of its supplies. Shipping delays in the Strait of Hormuz have led to price increases. Farmers here tell us it's already spiked by 20%. Higher fuel prices are compounding the situation, with each livestock feed delivery more expensive than the last. Farmers here are often described as the backbone of the Australian economy, and so the pressures felt here could ripple through the supply chain, with warnings the entire food industry could be at risk.
Trying to hurt China and simultaneously beg them to help open the Strait of Hormuz.
I'm Darren Jordan. US President Donald Trump threatens to strike Iran's power plants unless Tehran reopens the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours.
He promised not to hurt the Iranian people, to help them. How does hitting their infrastructure help? How does shutting off their power help the Iranian people?
Prime Minister calls it a difficult evening of battle.
Whoa!
And Iranian missiles target the city that's home to Israel's nuclear program. More than 50 people are injured in Dimona. President Trump says the US will, quote, obliterate Iran's power plants if it doesn't open the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours.
I don't think he knows what the word obliterate means. He uses it all the time, but
Trump issued the
I don't
threat
think he
via
understands.
social media on Saturday evening. A fifth of the world's oil and gas typically transits through the strait. Iran has effectively blockaded since the US and Israel started the war 3 weeks ago. Well, Iran responded immediately. A spokesman for the armed forces said it will retaliate against all US energy infrastructure in the region if attacked. Those threats were made as Israel carries out another round of airstrikes on the capital, Tehran.
So they're calling Trump's bluff,
joins us live now
which
from
they
the
should,
capital. Tawhid, so
because he's all
President
bluster,
Trump has threatened
no
to blow up
balls.
the power plants in Iran. What impact would that have then on the lives of ordinary Iranians if it happened?
Well, actually, that's going to be quite dependent upon the very nature of these potential strikes. We know that this is not the first time that Iranians are facing attacks targeting their infrastructures. Previously, we've got the energy minister of the country in the second week, if I'm not mistaken, from the initiation of these airstrikes, coming out to say that some of the electricity and water infrastructures of the country were targeted. But still, we're dealing with another potential major blow. And also, we have to keep in mind that we witnessed a very disastrous, I would say, attack by the Israelis and Americans targeting the oil facilities inside the capital. We know that 3-4 oil depots, fuel depots, as well as oil infrastructures were targeted since the beginning of these airstrikes in the
Trump
capital,
doesn't have any plan at all. He's winging it.
Specifically when it comes
Whatever
to
pops into his head.
aspects. We know that the water, soil, and air contamination was a serious health issue, a serious concern for people who are living actually in the Iranian capital. But still, now there is this further risk in case that happens. And of course, rhetorically speaking, we saw this very immediate reaction by the Iranian side, by the spokesperson of Khatam al-Anbiya headquarters, who came out just very short while ago after the Trump's statement to say that there is going to be a tit-for-tat strategy when it comes to retaliation retaliation. And this is part and parcel of Iran's strategy since the beginning of these airstrikes. They're saying that in case a bank is attacked, we're going to attack banks. If a oil facility is targeted, we're going to do the same. And this is just this echo of the same statement that we heard from this spokesperson. Very strong message, very clear message that in case of such an attack, Iran's retaliation is going to be just based on that tit-for-tat strategy.
Yeah, meanwhile, Tahid, there have been more airstrikes across Iran. What more can you tell us about them?
Well, actually, this is the continuation of these airstrikes. Over the past few hours, we have been able to hear the sounds related to activation of the air defense system of the capital, and we know that it happens mostly when there are some drone attacks, and of course in other cities, specifically in Karaj, a city which is located in the western part of the Iranian capital Tehran. We hear and we receive reports about explosions being heard in
We already know he
parts of
doesn't know what he's
Tehran.
doing,
Also,
Duncan.
we've got reports about explosions taking place.
It doesn't help the people of Iran, but he doesn't give a shit about the people of Iran
where these strikes from day one
or anywhere
are
else.
happening. And of course, it goes without saying that this is not the only night. We know that since the beginning, in more than
He has no plan and no idea what he's doing.
Witnessed the air strikes by the Americans.
He's just
in
flailing
Israelis.
and
More
trying
than
everything.
1,400 people have lost their lives, with many more injured. And specifically speaking of the targets, it goes without saying that it is not just the military headquarters or police stations or even the state-related buildings, but also residential areas which are being targeted. We know that a considerable number of them are houses and apartments belonging to very ordinary citizens, and of course schools, hospitals, and even buildings belonging to the Red Crescent have been targeted over the past 3 weeks
I agree,
since the
Minnie.
commencement
I agree.
of these airstrikes.
All right, Tahid Asadi live for us there in Tehran. Tahid, thank you. Well,
Yeah.
for more on President
His
Trump's latest
ballroom.
threat against Iran,
That's
let's
the
hand
most
over now to
important thing,
Anna
his
Francis in
ballroom.
Washington.
It's going to be great. It's going to be the biggest thing ever.
Hello, I'm Anna Burns Francis, live from Washington, D.C. President Trump has made a series of other comments on his Truth Social platform on Saturday. He says the United States has, quote, blown Iran off the map, and the military operation is weeks ahead of schedule. He says Iran's leadership is gone, their Navy and Air Force is dead, and they have absolutely no defence. He's also reiterated that Iran wants to make a deal, but adds, I don't. He said over the past 2 weeks, the war will soon be over, but there's
Did you
no
see
sign
that Trump
the US
stopped
president
Bill
is
Maher
about to call a
from
halt to
getting
hostilities.
what is it, the Mark Twain
In a moment,
Award
we'll bring
at
on
the
our
Kennedy
guest,
Center
Senator Azzotti.
because he doesn't like
But
Bill
first,
Maher because
let's
Bill
remind
Maher
you
makes fun of him.
about what President Trump had to
Tells
say
you how
about
petty
this
and
war
stupid and
just a
little,
little earlier on Saturday.
tiny Donald Trump really is.
We've knocked out their Navy, their Air Force. We've
Look at
knocked
this
out
lunatic.
their
Nice hair, you
anti-aircraft.
weirdo.
We've knocked out everything. We're roaming free. From a military standpoint, all they're doing is clogging up the strait. But from a military standpoint, they're finished.
All right, let's go to our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, who joins us now. Alan, what do we make of those comments, and what else President Trump has been, comments have been making over the past few hours?
Well, the threat to Iran and targeting their power infrastructure is clearly an escalation from Donald Trump. For so long, he said this is not a war against
He isn't
the
saving
Iranian
my
people.
ass.
But many will
From
feel
who?
that by
From what?
targeting civilian
The
infrastructure
country
like
that
this
was going to build
is
a bomb and
exactly
hit
that.
us
Here's another
in
thing that the
2
White House needs
weeks.
to consider.
The fuck
By
out.
targeting civilian infrastructure like that, I've been texting someone in the last hour or so. They say this is effectively a war crime. You cannot do that. It's something that is forbidden. And Donald Trump has quite openly said that within 48 hours, if access to the Strait of Hormuz is not given by Iran, if they put up any obstacles, then he will target their power infrastructure, starting
Bookmark
with
this.
their biggest
Let's see
power
what he
plant
does in
first.
48 hours.
Donald Trump has been talking since March the 9th about how the war is almost over. Here we are on the 21st, 3 weeks into the war. And it's clear that what almost through with the war actually means. He has talked about how he's destroyed the Air Force, which is true, how that most of the Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the sea, which is true, how they have aerial superiority over Iran, which is true. But of course, he's also said they have no more targets left to hit, yet they continue to hit targets in Iran. There will be concern in the Middle East about Donald Trump taking this sort of action, because the Iranians have been planning for a war with the United States.
Why would Iran
30
negotiate,
years. And
Duncan?
So
right? I mean, they've got Trump by the balls right now.
But it feels
so,
as if Donald
let him
Trump
hang.
is very
And many,
politically
please
in
don't
the
involve the
United
Beatles
States
in this.
about the Strait of Hormuz
I'm a huge
being
fan.
closed and the impact
I don't like
that's
that.
having on the cost
Just
of
kidding.
oil and the impact that's
I am
having
a big
on
fan.
the US economy. From a president who said that people would feel better, would be richer, would be more successful, this has been a huge stumbling point.
Richer and
this
more
also is
successful.
reflected
How's that
in the
working out
polls.
for them?
Although 100% of Republicans in a recent poll said they support everything that Donald Trump does, the average American voter is concerned about the war in Iran and where it is heading.
Chief US Correspondent Alan Fisher joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you.
You are
I'm joined
correct,
now
Ian.
by Sina Azodi, the Director of Middle East Studies
And
Program
Trump may
at
just
George
be
Washington
stupid enough to do
University.
it.
Sina, thank you so much for coming in. Obviously, this is all a developing story as we go on with watching what Donald Trump has to say, particularly as developing comments over this weekend. We just heard Alan Fisher there refer to an escalation. How concerned are you that these comments will directly relate to an escalation of what we see in terms of US attacks on Iran?
Well, very much so, because if the president actually goes ahead with targeting the power plants, I don't think Iranians will sit and watch. They will most likely going to target regional countries, energy infrastructure, power plants in the region, and then the U.S. side might want to escalate on its own side. And then I think we're already in the vicious cycle of escalation, but I think it's going to get worse for everybody in the region and for the Americans who were promised by the president that he's not going to start wars. He called the
If Bibi
previous
drops
interventions
nukes,
a
it's
big fat mistake.
game over for
And
all of
now
us, I
he's
think.
already
I mean,
stuck
if Bibi drops
in a
nukes,
war
Trump's
that
going
he
to drop
started.
nukes.
You talk about a vicious
And then
cycle of
what
escalation,
happens?
and I wonder to what
China
end,
launches
because
nukes,
if this is
Russia
another
launches
attack that
nukes.
prompts another retaliation, and yet we see another few days of the same things we have
We
already
get out of
seen.
hand completely.
What changes with this ramp up in the sort of attacks that the likes of US and Israel are making on Iran?
I believe that right now we unfortunately don't have any off ramps left, unless something
That's
big
a very
happens.
dangerous position to be in, is it not?
Yes, very much so. And I think each side thinks that they don't have much room to maneuver. They don't want to seem weak. They don't want to seem that or signal to the other side that they're backing down. And I think they are becoming the prisoners of their own decisions. This is a time that I think that the political leaders no longer control the war. It is war and the events that are actually controlling the political leadership in the US, in Iran, and Israel.
You know, there is that concept of groupthink that once everybody is in that mindset, there is very little room to maneuver, as you say, about getting out of it. And when we look at the words Alan was using there, escalation, and that we look at the targeting of civilian infrastructure. Will that targeting of civilian infrastructure prompt Iran to retaliate in different ways or in stronger terms than we have already seen so far?
I think the Iranian civilian infrastructure has already been targeted. In the first week of the war, we saw the Israeli attacks on Tehran's oil depot, which created these apocalyptic scenes from Tehran with smoke all over the city. The day after that, there was no sunlight in Tehran. That was how bad the situation was. So that line, I believe, has already been crossed. I think that the President Trump, to his credit, tried to stop that, but I think he's initiating his own
Congress has failed us again because they're in the bag for Trump.
Which is going to
their own
directly affect
demise.
the Iranians who are
They're
now
going to get
just
wiped out
entered the
in
new
November.
year yesterday.
And Trump doesn't care.
Is there an off-ramp for Iran? If there is no off-ramp for America, is there one for Iran here?
I think what Iranians, demand.
Trump doesn't have to
is
worry
not
about
just a
getting reelected,
ceasefire. They want
so he
a
doesn't care
longer
about
political
Republicans. He
settlement,
just used the
because
party
from their
to get power,
perspective, a
to get what he
ceasefire
wanted to
would
enrich
only
himself.
allow the
That's it.
Americans and the Israelis
This
to
whole
regroup,
thing, 2 terms,
replenish
nothing
the
but a
interceptors
grift
in the
to
region,
make money
and come
for him
back,
and his family.
if not 6
all
months,
this was ever
a year
about.
from now, they're
And
gonna
now he's
attack.
using our tax dollars
This time
and our
Iran
military
will have
to get more
a lower
of
hand
what he
in,
wants
or
for
less
himself.
cards to play with,
Period.
because of the impact of the attacks on their military and defense infrastructure.
Can we talk more broadly? And I realise you are an expert in the Iranian subject matter here, but there were rallies today through Washington, D.C. for some Iranian diaspora. We know that there is an enormous population of Iranians who live now in America. But yet there is a complicated arrangement of
I hope
feelings
I'm not
as
alive
to
for
how
World
people
War
feel about their
IV.
homeland, about its leadership, and about the role that either party plays in the war here. How much does that public sentiment
I agree,
play
Patricia.
into politicians from either side deciding where to go to next with this conflict?
I think in Iran, people are now, at least those who thought that U.S. intervention would bring him democracy, have faced the reality that bombs do not distinguish between, pro-regime and anti-regime people. And the nature of war, the way it works is that when bombs starts falling, people take shelters. People do not come to the streets because their survival instinct kicks in and they just want to survive. They want food, they want shelter. Thousands of Iranians have already been displaced out of their homes, and this was just ahead of their New Year, which, as I said, started yesterday. And I think in the Iranian diaspora, there are those who think, and again, that foreign interventions will bring democracy and freedom, but lessons of history prove otherwise. Bombs are not conducive to democracy and freedom.
This is perhaps a very deep question to be asking you as my final question to you, Senator, but you are an expert on Iran's nuclear program. You have a book coming out on this subject matter in just a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So when we look at the way that Israel has been conducting its role in this conflict, how concerned are you that nuclear facilities will end up being directly targeted to an extent that that would cause some kind of fallout to the wider region?
I shudder to imagine the effects of direct attacks on nuclear facilities, dissemination of radioactive material is going to hurt everybody in the region. All the GCC countries are going to get affected if, for example, the Bushehr nuclear reactor in the southern part of Iran is directly attacked. By the way, we had 2 projectiles that recently landed around the Bushehr reactor, and it's extremely dangerous. It applies to the Iranian side too.
It does, right? It's vice versa. The same could happen from Iran to other places as well.
And I think the attacks that the Iranians did near Dimona, I think it was a direct political message signaling from Iranians that if you attack our nuclear facilities, we can also target your nuclear facilities. And for a small country like Israel, it is extremely dangerous that radioactive material are disseminated.
Mr. Azadi, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you coming in. Sina Azadi, Director of Middle East Studies Program at George Washington University. All right, let's go to Manuel Rapallo, who joins us live now. Manny, you've been reporting from the State Department. What is the chatter from DC foreign policy circles on these latest developments?
The conversation inside here in Washington among those foreign policy circles is quite divided. More than anything, I would say at the moment it's quite urgent. One thing that we should note is that President Trump does still have a lot of support. And within his support group, there are many who argue that this military action by President Trump is finally achieving the deterrence.
Hitler had a lot of support in the bunker, too.
Washington have been
That didn't work out well for any of them.
Even among that group, there is this growing rift, this growing divide that we've seen among those who believe that there is no clear end game here. And it's that uncertainty that's fueling another conversation, a much louder conversation.
And it's up to older people like us, like me, to try to protect them from themselves. They
to
shouldn't
a
be
wider
thrown
conflict,
into
a regional war
a
that
war
stretches
for
from the Persian
billionaires,
Gulf to Lebanon
where a
and beyond.
pedophile
So
was just trying to distract
concern
from
right
the
now,
fact that he
we're
raped
talking about these
children.
foreign policy circles. There's a lot of chatter talking about the economic impact right now, the risk of a global shock, the continued disruption of supply chain, the continued disruption of energy shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. There's concern over the fallout between the United States and its closest allies. We know that President Trump's been trying to galvanize this international coalition of countries, NATO allies.
He isn't
I would say
galvanizing
the conventional
shit.
wisdom here, but really it's President Trump's argument is that it's other countries, not the United States, that rely heavily on Gulf oil, far more heavily than the United States does. And because of this, these countries need to do more. They need to step up militarily to help share in the burden of securing the Strait of Hormuz. So there's the fallout that we're witnessing in real time as President
So Trump
continues
shits his
to
diaper,
sort of,
throws it into the Strait of
berate,
Hormuz, and then
its
tells other
closest
countries,
allies
go
in
clean it up.
Europe. There's also, again, the conversations being had over whether or not there's going to be an off-ramp. I mean, over the course of the day, I've been reporting and listening to, I mean, maybe foolishly optimistic that there could be a diplomatic off-ramp, maybe even an economic off-ramp at this point to see an end to this conflict. We heard from President Trump on Friday, who said that he wanted the war to start winding down, but then the conversation within that same breath, the president is saying that there's going to be more troops.
You got it, Minnie.
Within
You got
the
it.
same framing of
Exactly
the Trump
right.
administration. We're hearing from Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, calling for $200 billion in war funding. So how can that be? How
Another
can these two things
$200
exist
billion.
at the same time? And I think right now what we're seeing is a very strategic message from the president.
We can't
On the one
afford to
hand,
feed
he's
the
saying
poor in this
to
country
the
or take care of the
American
least
people
among us,
that this war
but we've
has
got more
already
money
been
for
won,
wars.
militarily at least, but
And
to the
killing
rest
the
of
least
world,
among us
saying that
overseas.
he wants this war to come to an end.
Jesus
He
would be
cannot show any
very
weakness.
proud.
The United States has to project that strength and power in the region, and they're going to continue to do that for as long as it takes.
Manny, thank you very much. Manny Rapalo joining us from our newsroom in Washington, D.C. We're joined now by Paulo von Schirach. He's the president at the Global Policy Institute. Paulo, thank you very much for coming in this evening. We just heard Manny there refer to this dual messaging from the president, projecting this message at home that the war has been won, there is nothing to worry about, all in control, but on a global level, it's very clearly not over. What do you make of the most recent developments then about this 48-hour deadline and the likes?
Well, it's hard to say. And with President Trump, we know that he has a way of changing his mind and changing the perspective.
And that's what
very
Trump
quickly
promised when he
without any
campaigned
reference to
in
what was said
2024.
earlier. Yes, we
To
all
not have
looked at
foreign
this,
wars
the war
and
is
spend that
winding
money
down. Okay,
here
good.
on
Things
Americans.
are quieting. Maybe there is an off-ramp somehow. Maybe there are secret
It's almost like he
negotiations
lied.
we don't know any of that. But now it says, oh, if the Iranians don't open the Strait of Hormuz, then we're going to unleash hell and what have you. I'm not sure because, again, it's not quite clear to me what the tools are to do this. Iran is 4 times almost the size of Iraq. And we know how difficult that nut was to crack. And even when Americans supposedly won the war against Saddam Hussein and he was taken prisoner, et cetera, there was an occupation force of 150,000 Americans for several years. It didn't go well. We know that too. But if you try to say, okay, well,
yeah, we
if these
definitely
are the
don't know
metrics,
everything.
what's going to be in Iran?
Trump doesn't
that
know
means having more than
anything.
500,000 Americans. If
He's
you
in
want
over
to
his
take
head.
over Iran, if you
Always.
want unconditional surrender.
Since the
from
1980s,
Ayatollahs
he's
or
been
whoever
in
is
over his
charge
head.
now in Tehran today.
When he
So
was
it's
building
not
his
quite
shitty
clear to me what the
casinos in
tools
Jersey,
are
he was in over his
to,
head.
compel
It hasn't gotten any
the
better.
Iranian leadership to give in and to say, okay, we're done. We know Strait of Hormuz is open. Everything is fine. You can go, come,
Yep.
etc. It's not a bad objective, of course.
Yeah.
We know 20% of the oil, then we've got the gas, the fertilizers. We know all that stuff. But the tools are not clear to me. We've been bombing Iran now for several weeks, successfully, I would say, but not to the point of forcing the Iranians into submission.
Can we talk about those tools in the toolbox? Because I would imagine that it would become quite evident quite quickly if there were 500,000 foot soldiers on the way.
Yes, and they're not there.
And they are not there, and they cannot magically be shipped
here.
there overnight. So what other tools
No, he
are
hasn't,
there?
Duncan.
I am
He's been an
my
epic
knowledge of warfare
failure
is close
at
to zero.
every
So
turn.
please, if you could help us understand,
well, of course,
what else would be going on behind the scenes here?
well, we know America
His first
has
term
control
was
of
a
the
failure
skies
as
over
president.
Iran. That was
He
accomplished
completely
with,
fucked the COVID
jointly
response.
with the Israelis. In
Completely.
fairness, they essentially destroyed all the air defense.
And now he's fucking this. He's fucking the whole
use
world.
bombers, precision
Again.
bombs, whatever. But to hit what exactly? They said that the first few days of war, they hit, 8,000 targets? How many more targets are there that are high value and that
They're
would
totally
really
obliterated.
tilt the balance of this conflict in favor of America? It's not clear to me. I'm sure the Pentagon has its war plans and what have you, but so we know we have the same.
He does have Trump water. I think it still
let's call
exists.
them,
I think they serve it down at
penetration bombs that were
Mar-a-Lago.
used, remember last year against the nuclear facilities?
But all
at
of
that
this
time
is
it was
still
said
from the sky, is it not?
That's
So
right.
Agreed,
This
Ron.
is a long way from
Agreed.
winning a war.
How many times has he
And
declared
also,
bankruptcy, or
some
his
things that
organization
people keep
has
forgetting,
declared
that
bankruptcy?
a war ends not when somebody says I won, but when somebody says I lost.
Trump casinos,
Until
Trump
that moment
steaks,
comes, the war is not over.
Trump
You have to have somebody who
Airlines,
says, okay, enough.
Trump
I
this,
had it.
Trump that.
Please, let's stop this.
All failures.
I don't see the current
Bankruptcy,
Iranian
bankruptcy,
leadership,
bankruptcy.
as bad
He
as they
bankrupted
are,
a casino.
as being
A
easy
casino.
on this and to say, you know what, we had it good for 47 years, and now it's time to let go because the Americans are really too strong. They're not going to do that.
You don't think this tweet will prompt that sort of action?
I doubt it. Again, I wish look, everybody agrees that the Iranian leadership is a bad lot. Okay, but that doesn't mean that if there was a goal to eliminate the leadership, which seemed to be the Israeli goal from the beginning. They said it at the beginning.
All right, sorry guys, I muted the feed for a second. Iran's top military commander says it will strike U.S. and allied energy, IT, and desalination infrastructure across the Middle East if the U.S. targets Iranian energy sites. A response after Trump threatened to obliterate Iran's power plants within 48 hours if the Strait of Hormuz isn't reopened. So Iran's already said they're going to hit everything in the Middle East that they can hit to hurt us and our allies. So Trump's threat, they're calling his bluff.
I'm not sure that right now, without a massive land invasion, which would mean conquering a country which is 4 times the size of Iraq with 92
You're not getting a
million
massive
people.
land
How do you
invasion.
do that? I'm not saying it's impossible, but not.
And not just practically. How do you do that and sell it to the public where you are coming up to midterm elections or where you are asking your allies to get involved? Or
And also,
I agree,
let's keep in
Brian.
mind
And
America
if you
has
know the
essentially
history of
zero
David,
tolerance
yeah,
for war
okay, he killed Goliath, but he was a
We
real
had, what,
piece of shit
15,
as an
16
adult.
people dead, and
A
it looks
real
like
piece of
the end
shit.
of the world. I'm not saying that I
no, each of those lives was very important. And,
we don't
and
want
of course,
No,
their
they won't,
families.
Duncan.
disrespect to any of the fallen people who are in the line of duty and get killed, in action due to certainly not fault of their own. But if that's the level of tolerance, and we're talking about a land invasion, which would mean, for sure, more casualties.
It would.
In the light of the midterm elections, with part of the MAGA movement that says this is
You
horrible.
got it right,
this
Minnie.
is not what we wanted. You, Mr. President, promised no more forever wars. You said enough with the Middle East. We're not interested in regime change. And then things have been kind of reshuffled in a way that is different. I'm not quite sure. At the moment, opinion polls would indicate that the base is still with him. Tucker Carlson is not with him. Fuentes is not with him.
I don't think those are new developments, perhaps, Paulo. So.
Exactly, but it seems for the moment he can hold on to this. But remember that the elections are
I hope,
won
Wayne.
in the middle.
I really hope.
And the independents, who will probably tilt the balance when it comes especially to the election in the House of Representatives, and perhaps the Senate as well, are against this massively.
And they're politically engaged. They remember the comments from, I will not go into war, I do not start wars, and the like. Cut me dry if I'm completely wrong on this, and I may sound quite naive asking you, but I want to clarify. Is there any kind of backdoor diplomacy going on at this point?
Look, we know Oman had offered its good offices, previously, and I would think that they're still engaged in some fashion. I would be surprised if they're not, because they have
Yeah.
good relations.
Let's see how long it
with
takes for
decent
Trump to blame
relations
Biden
with
for all of
Iranians.
this.
So
Or Obama.
is there some
Barack
kind of
Hussein
a
Obama.
backdoor possibility? Of course, we don't know that because by definition, if these negotiations are going on, they are secret. But I see,
and perhaps not very successful thus far.
So far. So, well, exactly. So we have to see how this is going to be played out. I think that Mr. Trump can come up, as he said in his Truth Social, we won, we're done, we destroyed everything, it's time to go home. The Strait of Hormuz,
He does it every 5 minutes,
Thank you very
Duncan.
much. China, go open, it's your oil, right? You go open the Strait of Hormuz. Japan, be my guest. Korea, be my guest. Europe, goodbye. We don't need the oil from the Strait of Hormuz, which is technically true. America is not getting oil from that venue anymore. Completely different story when we had the oil embargo in 73, 74, or 79 after the fall of the Shah. I wouldn't be surprised. But again, I'm not making any predictions. I think that it is really difficult for the president to say, okay, now we go all in and we are going to go after the regime and we go back to what he said just a few days ago, unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender means we take over the entire country because everybody laid down their arms, and I wouldn't count on that because even if there are some people in Tehran, and there may be dissident factions among the Ayatollahs in the Islamic Guard who say, maybe this is too heavy, let's find a way to agree or something, and I'm willing to negotiate. But what if the others are not willing to negotiate? And they say, okay, you are a traitor, we'll kill you, or try to kill you. And we go in the mountains and resist forever. Who knows?
That's where we sit at the moment, isn't it? Who knows? Paolo, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. Paolo von Schirach, President at the Global Policy Institute. All right, that's it from the team here in Washington, D.C. We now hand you back to Darren Jordan at our global headquarters in Doha.
Anna, thank you. Well, you're watching Al Jazeera. A quick reminder of our top stories here this hour. President Trump says the U.S. will, quote, obliterate.
Thank you all for joining tonight. Half hour left. I'll see you again tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. Love you all.
estimated Iran?
Well, I think when you talk to military professionals, I don't think any of this is much of a surprise to them, nor do I think it comes as much of a surprise to the Israeli Prime Minister. I think it does come as a surprise to President Trump. The approach to this war did not go through the usual consultation process that happens in most U.S. administrations. It was a decision sort of made on the fly, maybe with a lot of wishful thinking. And I think President Trump himself has been very surprised by Iran's attacks on his Gulf friends and Gulf partners. That was not a military surprise. They knew that could be done. And I think he was surprised by the closure of the Straits of Hormuz. Unfortunately, he seems to be learning on the job, as it were. But yeah, I would say Iran was underestimated by the U.S. White House.
Trump's learning on the job how to be president of the United States and the leader of the free world. It's always great.
The drones in high numbers do come as a surprise for some of the Gulf countries and the U.S. Although it's been seen in Ukraine, they were not adequately prepared for them.
Israeli troops are simultaneously expanding their ground offensive in southern Lebanon. Airstrikes targeted several houses and commercial shops in the district of Tyre. More than 1,000 people
Thanks,
have been
Robert.
killed in Lebanon.
Don't forget to
and over 1
like and
million more
subscribe, buddy.
displaced since hostilities resumed between Israel and Hezbollah on March 2nd. Bernard Smith has more from the Lebanese
Thanks for
capital,
helping out the
Beirut.
channel by stopping by and commenting and screwing your own feet. Good job.
How many casualties it suffered or what sort of damage it suffered. Israel's military speculates on the numbers of fighters it's killed, but there's no way of getting independent verification of it. It's worth saying this evening that Hezbollah has said that it's been fighting with Israeli forces with medium and long-range weapons for the town of Hayam, which is a strategically important town. It's high up. Israel, in previous confrontations with Hezbollah in previous wars, has tried to take this town. It's never tried to manage it. It's strategically important because if Israel gets it, it cuts off Hezbollah's supply routes from the east to the south. Hezbollah needs to keep it because it gives this panorama view over southern Lebanon and northern Israel. And it is fair to say that since the last conflict, Hezbollah has been weakened. Its traditional supply lines from Iran through Syria have been cut off. So it is in a weakened position, but impossible to say exactly how so.
Now, 1 in 5 people in Lebanon have had to flee their homes over the past 3 weeks as Israel expands its offensive against Hezbollah. Many are camped out on the streets of the capital, Beirut. Volunteers have been cooking thousands of meals for those displaced, among them this businessman who's been grilling shrimp for those in need.
Our people deserve to be pampered, cared for and supported. They're displaced, they're suffering, but what makes them happy? Besides returning home, besides being with their families and their villages, besides defeating the Israelis, we try as much as we can to improve their situation, given what they're going through here. You look around and see displaced people living in tents and all that, but they're eating shrimps.
The one who emphasizes with people is truly human. This person who is giving his effort and money for the sake of God to feed people who do not have enough to eat, who left their jobs, homes and livelihoods and fled seeking refuge here, and they come here and feed them. Whoever reminds you of this greatness is great.
Now, a search operation is underway for the crew and passengers of a Qatari military helicopter after it crashed into the sea. Qatar's defense ministry says the aircraft came down in regional waters after suffering a technical malfunction. The helicopter was carrying out what the ministry called routine duty when it crashed. Saudi Arabia has given an Iranian military attaché and 4 other diplomats 24 hours to leave the country as Iran keeps up attacks on its Gulf neighbors. A series of drone and missile strikes have targeted Saudi Arabia. Air defenses in Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates have also carried out several interceptions. Resul Serdars following developments from Riyadh.
We have seen another statement from the Minister of Defense saying that 4 more Iranian drones have been intercepted by Saudi air defenses. So far, in the last 24 hours, there have been nearly 60 drones that were fired from Iran towards Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi authorities here are saying that all
This is what happens in this type of war. Things are spreading, and they're spreading fast.
I was talking to
It
Saudi retired general in the armed forces of the country, and he was expressing the confidence in the country's capability of defending the nation here. And was saying that the country has one of the most sophisticated and, of course, strongest air forces in the region. But having said that the majority of drones so far have been particularly aimed at the eastern province of the country is important, because the overwhelming majority of the country's energy facilities and resources are located in the eastern province, including the export terminals and the processing plants. But Saudi Arabia, compared to the other Gulf countries, has an advantage, and that it has an alternative. Through the Red Sea also, it can transfer or transport its energy. So 30% of Saudi energy, indeed, it is being transported to the world through the Red Sea. But Iranian drones or missiles are not only targeting the eastern province, but just in recent days we have seen that escalating attacks on the city of Yanbu, which is a coastal city and is hosting important energy facilities of Saudi Arabia. So here, this is definitely putting a huge pressure on the Saudi economy, because the energy is the economic lifeline of the country. And of course, while all of that is happening, so the rift between Riyadh and Tehran is also further growing.
Iran has denied targeting a joint British-US military base in the Indian Ocean. The UK's Ministry of Defence says the attack on Diego Garcia Island, which is more than 5,000 kilometres from Tehran, was unsuccessful. British Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper said the UK would continue to provide defensive support against what she called reckless Iranian threats. Despite Tehran's denial, Israel says the attack highlights Iran's ability to strike well beyond the Middle East.
You can't believe Israel. Can't believe Iran, but you can't believe
Iran launched
Israel.
a two-stage intercontinental ballistic missile with a range of 4,000 kilometers at an American target on the island of Diego Garcia. These missiles are not intended to strike Israel. Their range reaches European capitals. Berlin, Paris, and Rome are all within direct threat range.
Keep trying to draw everybody else into the war.
The UK Prime Minister has told Cyprus
That could be a
the
false
US will
flag
not be
right
allowed
there.
to use the British air base on the island to attack Iran. The RAF Akrotiri base was hit by an Iranian drone early in the conflict. In a phone call with the Cypriot president, Keir Starmer said the facility would not be part of its agreement with the US to use British bases for defensive strikes on Iranian missile sites. Sonia Gallego has more from London.
The phone conversation on Saturday between the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the Cypriot President Nikos Christodoulides was all about trying to ease the political tensions that have erupted since the start of this war. Primarily, it is about the security situation in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Cyprus as well. Of course, Cyprus being targeted by what UK authorities said was Hezbollah drones from Lebanon as well. That caused an enormous amount of consternation for the Cypriot leadership as well. And only 2 days ago, the president himself, the Cypriot president, said that after this particular war, that perhaps it was time for Cyprus to reconsider the presence of those UK bases on the island as well. That, of course, has set alarm bells off in the UK as well, because Cyprus is also a strategic part for the UK as well. It is enormously important. It has carried out missions from Akrotiri to Syria and to Iraq as well. So while tensions are attempting to be allayed by this phone conversation as well, there is also still the determination to try and resolve these hostilities via diplomatic means as well, with the Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying that they would only act on a defensive measure and that the only way to resolve this crisis would be through diplomatic means. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera, London.
Well, Iran is still blocking the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's daily oil supply usually passes through the strait. Oil and natural gas prices have surged, putting significant strain on international energy supplies. The US is calling on allies, including NATO, to help secure shipping through the crucial waterway. Jalid Aga explains why achieving that is so difficult.
Securing the Strait of Hormuz is no easy task. Firstly, it's narrow, located between Oman and Iran. It's only about 39 kilometers at its widest point. Secondly, the waters are shallow, confining supertankers to two tight shipping lanes, one for going in and the other for going out. The limited space means that if they're attacked, these huge ships have very little room to maneuver. Iran controls the islands nearby. That includes Keshm, Abu Musa, the Greater and Lesser Tums, and Larak, which it can use as military outposts to launch drones and missiles. But Iran has another advantage. Its southern coastline is mountainous. This provides camouflage for fortified bunkers deep underground, but also for missile launches. Iran has plenty of military options at its disposal. That includes fast attack craft, submarines, and mines. US forces have been targeting its naval assets, but Iran says it retains significant capabilities. So, what would it take to end its grip on the Strait of Hormuz? Well, naval vessels would need to escort commercial tankers, and that's to help provide protection against any attacks. The waterway would also have to be cleared of any mines, and perhaps most significantly, the entire operation would require international cooperation.
Israel's defense minister said attacks on Iran will continue on an even greater scale.
This week, the intensity of the strikes to be carried out by the IDF and the US military against the Iranian terror regime and the infrastructure on which it relies will rise significantly.
The Iranian terror
campaign led by
regime.
US
How
President
about the
Donald Trump
Israeli
and Israeli
terror
Prime Minister
regime?
Benjamin Netanyahu will continue. We are determined to keep leading the offensive against the Iranian terror regime, to behead its commanders and thwart its strategic capabilities until every security threat is eliminated.
Now, Israel's been assassinating leading Iranian military, security and political figures as part of its stated war aims. But the policy of Israeli targeted killings dates back decades. Al Jazeera's Noor O'Day has more from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank.
Cries for revenge grow louder in Iran. Hundreds of thousands mourn high-ranking figures killed in Israeli strikes just weeks after the assassination of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Israel promises they won't be the last. They were also not the first. Israel has used political assassinations since its inception, starting with Swedish diplomat Folke Bernadotte, killed by a Zionist armed group known as the Sterngang in 1948. Over the decades, Israel has carried out thousands of covert and public assassinations around the world. The Mossad, its spy agency, stood behind many of those operations, which included abductions, hit squads, bombings, and even poison. In the 1960s, the Mossad unleashed Operation Damocles, targeting German scientists working with Egypt, led by Jamal Abdel Nasser, to develop its missile capabilities. In the 70s and 80s, Israel assassinated dozens of Palestinians, intellectuals, including author Ghassan Kanafani, and diplomats such as Mahmoud al-Hamshari, as well as other prominent figures like Khalil al-Wazir. The targeted killings accelerated after the year 2000, claiming the lives of many well-known activists and high-profile political figures in the occupied West Bank and
Okay,
Gaza.
Dennis, go ahead.
Among them, PLO leader Abu Ali Mustafa in 2001, and Hamas founder Sheikh Ahmed Yassin in 2004. Palestinians have long maintained that Israel was behind the mysterious illness and subsequent death of President Yasser Arafat. Israel is also accused of assassinating dozens of Iraqi and Iranian scientists over the years. By 2023, state-sponsored killings had reached industrial scale. Hundreds of Palestinian journalists, artists, academics, and doctors were targeted, often with their families. During the war on Gaza, Israel assassinated senior Hamas leaders in Gaza, Beirut, and Tehran. It also killed Hezbollah's longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah, and just days later, his favored successor, along with other senior officials. Now Israel has removed political approvals needed for assassinations, authorizing the army to target any Iranian or Hezbollah leader when the opportunity arises. But questions remain, though, as to whether all these killings will make Israel safe as its leaders claim. History suggests otherwise. Noor O'Day, Al Jazeera, Ramallah, Palestine.
Well, the US-Israeli attacks are taking their toll on ordinary Iranians. For one family, they've been searching for their brother a week after an airstrike reduced his supermarket to rubble in the capital, Tehran. Kelly Callahan reports.
Buried somewhere under the rubble of this building in Tehran is Mahdi Mirza Hosseini, 5 days after the airstrike that caused this. His brothers are still searching for him.
We all hope he's found safe or hospitalized. We just pray he's only injured and in the hospital, because there's no trace of him here.
This block housed businesses including a bank and a supermarket. Mahdi had opened his shop in this location just 1 month ago.
My mother had tried to stop him, saying, "Don't go, the situation is bad." He said he had to go, the customers had called.
The Iranian capital has been relentlessly bombarded by US and Israeli forces since the war began last month. Civilian areas are also being hit.
My brother had a protein supermarket store here on the first floor. My brother's store was from here to the end of the wall. He went to the store during the war, and now he's missing.
Despite the risk of daily airstrikes targeting Tehran, these brothers are determined to find their sibling. Kaylee Callahan, Al Jazeera.
Let's take a quick look now at some of the other news. It was Mother's Day across most of the Arab world and the Middle East on Saturday. It's usually a time of celebration, but in Palestine it's a day of grief and hardship as mothers mourn children lost in the war and children face the day without their mothers. Ian Huddery reports now from Gaza.
In most places, Mother's Day is filled with flowers, gifts, and celebration. But here in Gaza, it is marked by tears and grief. Mothers who lost their children during the war, killed in Israeli attacks, mark this day in mourning instead of celebration. Like Imrami, she still lost 3 of her sons. 2 of their bodies are still being withheld by Israeli authorities. She never said goodbye and still waits for the moment she can hold them one last time.
I miss my sons on Mother's Day. They used to bring me gifts, flowers, sweets, and ask me about my needs. They were the light of my life. I keep looking at their photos and clothes.
Inside her tent, their photos rest beneath her pillow. She looks at them every day, as if holding on will keep their memory alive. She has not given away their clothes. They're the only last pieces she has left of her sons. Other mothers spend this day in graveyards, sitting beside their children's graves and the only place they feel close to them. And for many children, there is no Mother's Day at all. Their mothers were killed, leaving behind silence where love was lived. Maram Ahmed is 14 years old, the sole survivor of her family. She lost her mother, her closest friend, in an Israeli airstrike that killed her entire family. This year, Maram will not celebrate. She will watch other children with their mothers in silence.
On Mother's Day, even if I didn't have money, I would buy my mum a gift from my allowance, even if it was for less than $1. I just wanted to make her happy. This year, my mum's not with me. This is the second Mother's Day without her. I feel so sad when I see other children with their mothers, but I don't show it.
This day carries unbearable loss for mothers who lost their children and for children who lost their mothers. On Mother's Day in Gaza, there's no celebrations, only loss. Mothers are grieving and children are left behind. Hind al-Khudari, Al Jazeera, Gaza, Palestine.
A strike on a hospital in Sudan's East Darfur state has killed more than 60 people and destroyed part of the facility. The World Health Organization says the Al-Din teaching hospital was targeted on Friday night. Multiple patients, including 13 children, as well as 2 nurses and a doctor, are among the dead. There was no information about who was behind the attack. A Ukrainian delegation has been holding talks with US officials to end the war with Russia. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says his team has been speaking to US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Russian forces have continued targeting Ukrainian cities. A Russian drone strike has killed 2 people in the city of Zaporizhia. 2 children were also injured in the attack.
I stopped believing a long time ago. When will this all just end? When will they finally reach an agreement? How long can they keep negotiating? Just give it to the Russian side so hard that it hurts them as much as it hurts us.
Now, France is gearing up for the second round of closely watched municipal elections on Sunday. The vote is seen as an indicator of what could happen during next year's presidential election. Natasha Butler reports from Paris.
The party of French far-right leader Marine Le Pen has never won a major city in local elections, but now Marseille is within its grasp.
Historic is the only word for it. The wind of change and hope has swept through our city like never before.
National Rally candidate Frank Alicio is neck and neck with the incumbent socialist Mayor Benoît Payan, who's urging voters to back him.
I want to speak about how serious this moment is. The National Rally is on the threshold of power in the city. Never in Marseille has the National Rally been so close to victory.
The National Rally made strong gains in the first round, but the party could struggle in the runoff as some candidates have formed alliances hoping to block it. At the other end of the political spectrum, the hard left France Unbound party's already won the city of Saint-Denis, north of Paris, and is on track to take another major town, Roubaix.
We have to stay mobilized. Elections are never won in advance. We're in the lead, but we can't rest on our laurels.
While the far right and hard left have momentum, traditional parties are still expected to win most cities, including the capital. It'll be a tight race here in Paris between the two frontrunners, the conservative politician Rachida Dati and the socialist Emmanuel Grégoire. Both are hoping to take over from Anne Hidalgo, the socialist mayor of Paris, whose legacy will include overseeing the Olympic Games in the city and making it more bike-friendly.
Quite like a lot of what Anne Hidalgo has done with the the pedestrianisation here, reducing the level of cars, trying to clean up the air a little bit.
I want someone who cares not only about people in central Paris, but people from the suburbs too, who come here to work.
France has 35,000 mayoral seats. For political parties, these elections are a critical test ahead of next year's crucial presidential ballot, when voters will pick a successor to Emmanuel Macron. Natasha Butler, Al Jazeera, Paris.
Cuba is scrambling to restore power supplies after the third nationwide blackout this month plunged millions into darkness. The country's creaking energy infrastructure is under growing strain. Fuel shortages caused by a US oil blockade has effectively shut its power plants down. The blackouts have left many people struggling to get basic supplies, including food and water. Former FBI Director and Special Counsel Robert Mueller has died at the age of 81. He's best known for leading the high-profile federal investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. After he concluded that Russia had interfered in the election, he became a target of President Donald Trump's anger. Trump posted on social media saying he's glad that Mueller is dead.
Trump is a pig.
We're going to take a very short break now. I'm Darren Jordan. Stay with us.
All right, thank you all for joining me tonight. Hope you enjoyed the stream. Hope you enjoyed all the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll be back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So hope to see you there. Have a good night. Love you all.